All right, good morning. I call to order the meeting of the Post Advisory Committee for November 19th, 2024. If you would please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to start the meeting. Pledge allegiance.
The flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Please take your seats. Ms. Essex, will you please take roll call of the Post Advisory Committee?
Good morning, Advisory Committee members. Advisory Member Cordova,
Present.
Advisory Member Cottrell,
Present.
Advisory Member Ehrman,
Present.
Advisory Member Gamboa, Advisory Member Honey,
Present.
Advisory Member Oborn, Advisory Member Rosa.
Present.
Advisory Member Salazar,
Present.
Advisory Member Stalker,
Present.
Advisory Member Morrell,
Present.
Advisory Member Pacheco.
Pacheco present.
Okay, thank you. I would now like to introduce Assistant Executive Director Jim Grotkow and Post Executive Director Manny Alvarez.
Thank you.
Thank you. We will now move into public comment. This is time set aside for members of the public to comment on items on the advisory committee agenda pursuant to commission policy. I, as the advisory chair, will manage the public comment period in deference to the committee's workload and meeting time restraints. Up to 15 minutes is allotted at the beginning of each meeting for public comments on items on the agenda. Members of the public who wish to speak are asked to limit their remarks to no more than 5 minutes each. If we have many people who wish to speak on the same topic, I, as the chair, may intervene and will ask that you limit remarks to no more than 1 minute. Pursuant to existing commission policy, I, the chair, may conclude the public comment period if multiple speakers are voicing repetitive or similar statements and the 15-minute public comment period has expired. Please be advised that the committee cannot take action on items not on the agenda. Please remember that this meeting is being transcribed, so I may politely interrupt and ask you to repeat or speak slowly and clearly so your comment can be correctly captured in the transcript. Is there anyone who would like to address the committee during public comment? Seeing none, we will now move to the approval of action summary and transcript. Our first item is the approval of the action summary and meeting transcript from the June 12, 2024 Advisory Committee meeting. Is there a motion to approve the action summary and transcript from the June 12, 2024 meeting?
So moved.
Okay, motion Morrell. Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
Second Cottrell. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions?
Tony will abstain.
Alicia Russell will abstain.
Two,
Rova as well.
three abstentions.
Well.
4 abstentions.
And Aaron will abstain.
Okay, the motion does pass. Okay, I will now call upon Assistant Executive Director Jim Grotkow to provide the announcements.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The first announcement we'd like to make is just identifying our new members on the advisory committee and giving them an opportunity to say anything they'd like to say. So our first new member is Sheriff Corey Honey of the Butte County Sheriff's Office, who represents the California State Sheriff's Association.
Good morning, sir. Thank you very much. It's an honor to be part of this committee. Looking forward to serving on the committee and doing the best that I can to help you all move forward with some great policies with regard to law enforcement. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Our next member is Detective Alicia Rosa of the San Bernardino Sheriff's Office, who represents the Peace Officers Research Association.
Morning. Thank you for having me. I'm very honored and pleased to be serving on the advisory committee. I'm looking forward to seeing some new changes and propelling some exciting things in California. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. Our next new member is Investigator Kenneth Ehrman, who represents Peace Officers Research Association.
Good morning. Again, my name is Kenny Ehrman. I'm here on behalf of PORAC, and I wanted to just thank everybody for the opportunity to be here with you all and to work collaboratively on these issues. And I look forward to the progress we'll make together as a group, and I look forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Our next new member is Vice Chancellor Anthony Cordova of the California Community College Chancellor's Office.
Good morning, and thank you for having me. On behalf of the California Community Colleges, it's an honor to be here and a pleasure working with you guys. Look forward to the opportunity to engage and collaborate, and appreciate it again. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next new member is Captain Miguel Pacheco of the Turlock Police Department, who represents the California Peace Officers Association.
Like my colleagues, thanks for having me. Honored to be here. Looking forward to working with the commission, and on behalf of the members of CPUA, we're looking forward to pushing training in the state and working collaboratively with post. So thank you again.
Thank you, Captain. Our last new member is not able to make it this morning. It's Senior Instructor Dominic Gamboa of the Savage Training Group, who represents the private presenters. I just want to, on behalf of Post, thank you for joining the advisory committee. We look forward to a very robust conversations and review of pending regulations and changes that may be coming about regarding Post, and appreciate your time here and look forward to working with you all. My second announcement is just the Post Excellence in Training Award and the OJ Bud Hawkins Awards. With those are currently open, and those are annual awards that are given out by the commission. And the period that it's open is through December 31st this year. So I just want to encourage any of the membership to bring back the announcements, if you will. I know we've sent them out to multiple people, but to encourage nominations for these valuable awards. So that's everything I have, unless the executive director has any comments.
I do not. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I also want to welcome all of our new members. It's exciting to have some new faces in the group and to hear your input. And on second, Jim, on the awards nominations, these are excellent awards and opportunities for folks. I know I shared it with the association that I represent. Just ask that you would share it with your various associations so we can get some good nominations and recognize good work that's out there. So thanks for your assistance on that. Okay, we have a number of presentations that have been requested today. With some new folks on the group, I do want to remind you that we do have a court reporter who is transcribing the meeting. So as we receive presentations, if you have a question or if you have comments, if you would please state your name prior to asking a question or making a comment for the court reporter so that they know who it is that's making a comment. We'd appreciate that. And the same would go for any motions or seconds that we have throughout the afternoon. So with that, Assistant Executive Director Jim Grotka will announce the agenda items to be presented today.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we received a request from advisory committee members to have presentations on the following agenda items: consent items D through J, and Basic Training Bureau item A through B, Certificate Bureaus items A through E, and Training Program Services item A, and PostAD item A. So we believe we'll have a pretty full agenda of presentations today.
Okay, thank you. So our first presentation, we'll call it consent item 2D. At this time, I'll call upon Staff Services Manager Melanie Singley, Strategic Communication and Research, who will provide a report on this item related to peace officer background investigation files.
Morning, Chair Salazar, committee members. This item regarding the transferability of peace officer background investigation files between agencies is being requested for discussion at the request of Tracy Avalar, Chief of Foster City Police Department and current president of the California Police Chiefs Association. Currently, Commission Regulation 1953, Peace Officer Background Investigation, has limited exceptions to allowing a hiring agency to use a peace officer candidate's previously completed background investigation. Those exceptions include, most commonly, peace officers returning to the same agency after a break in service. Less common, interim chiefs who have undergone a background with a previous agency. And then in very limited circumstances, peace officers transferring between departments that maintain a centralized background investigation function. There is also a requirement that background investigation information be shared with potential employers, but only for investigative leads. For individuals returning to a department after separation and for interim chiefs who have previously undergone a background investigation, an update is required. A background investigation update requires a new personal history statement that addresses any changes from the initial background investigation. The agency must also address all new information in the updated PHS and also minimally include checks for local, state, and national criminal records, driving records, credit records, and verification of qualification for appointment consistent with Government Code Section 1029. The updated background investigation documentation must be maintained with the initial background investigation documents. In 2019, subsection F was added to Regulation 1953 to address concerns about the need for agencies to hire interim agency heads within a relatively short period of time. The regulation allows, at the discretion of the hiring authority, the transfer of initial background file of an interim chief from one agency to another, and a background investigation update to be completed in lieu of a complete new background investigation. With this provision, there are specific criteria that must be met. The interim chief must have initially been investigated for an interim chief position by a post-participating agency in accordance with all current requirements. The individual must have served as an interim police chief within the last 24 months, and the initial background investigation must have been conducted within the last 5 years. The background file must also have been determined compliant by post, and the results of the initial background investigation must be available and reviewed by the hiring authority. The prospective hiring agency must also receive and maintain the initial background investigation file from the originating agency, which is to be kept with the updated background investigation file. Aside from the limited exception for interim chiefs, there are no provisions for a prospective hiring agency to use a background investigation conducted by another agency. Periodically, agencies have inquired about the potential for the transferability of background investigation files between agencies who, for example, may have been recently released from an agency for not passing probation due to non-disciplinary reasons. This agenda item and discussion is to address those inquiries. Are there any questions regarding the regulation requirements? If not, then we can move on to discussion.
Any questions from the committee members on this item? Any discussion or comments? Thank you for the report. I know.
Yeah, actually, hold on. So
Please.
first off, how do I let you know that I want to ask a question or talk? Do I just raise my hand? Is that?
Raise your hand and
Thank you. I
yeah,
appreciate that. Sorry, I'm new here.
no problem.
That was why do we get this? Why are we getting this presentation? Are you considering changing it, or is it just for our edification?
So the question came up from the chief of the CPOA, I believe it was.
Yeah.
Cal Chiefs.
Great.
When somebody that gets hired goes through a background process, maybe fails out in FTO, but they have not necessarily done anything that is serious misconduct or anything,
Sure.
about not having to put them right back through another background investigator. They essentially said that oftentimes these agencies are using the same background investigator, but yet they have to pay for a whole new one to be done, even though that background investigator has already done it 4 or 5 months ago. So currently it's not allowed to be done. And so the discussion is for the commission to decide whether they want us to move forward with altering regulation at a future meeting to allow the potability basically of that background.
Okay, so it wasn't just for information. There is some desire to change the regulation to allow what you just talked about.
That's correct. So there'll be a presentation tomorrow by one of the commissioners, I believe, to talk about it specifically about what the field is asking for, at least in one area of the state, and allowing an opportunity for us to kind of hear the feedback and then go back at a future meeting and bring an agenda item potentially that would change regulation.
So you're not looking for anything from this body?
Any kind of input you may want to give, that if you think it's a bad idea, if you think it's a good idea, if you think it's something that is a long time waiting, any concerns you may have of releasing a file from your possession and giving it to another agency potentially to review. So that's kind of what we seek with these kind of items.
Well, then on that note, I would say not all background investigations are created equally. And dismissal off of probation can often be for a number of underlying causes that may not rise to disciplinary or misconduct, but would be worthy of consideration by another agency before they put that person back out on the road. And so I think it'd be prudent to be very specific in terms of the time frame that you would allow for the other agency's background to be considered. I definitely think there needs to be an update and some inquiry into why the person was released from probation to determine if that might prohibit them from working in law enforcement or other agency. I would narrowly tailor any or recommend that any change be narrowly tailored and not just a wholesale, we'll accept your background and off you go.
Yes, Ms. Rosa.
Alicia Rosa. So kind of, I'm assuming that even though maybe somebody was on FTO or with a different agency for a couple months, that we're talking about this new background, if they go to another agency, that there's going to be at the very least, an update from the time they were hired with that agency till the time they're getting hired with the next agency. Is that correct?
That's the kind of advice we're seeking
Okay.
ultimately, but we would assume so. You'd have to do some level of update to ensure that something hasn't gone on between.
Right.
That's
A
it.
lot can happen in a couple months. So, and then a lot can happen when, you're acting as a peace officer, whether you're in training or not, and that would be a rise to some kind of, misconduct or some other kind of issue that would maybe didn't happen at the first background. So that would be definitely my concern.
Any additional questions from the committee? And just for the committee members, so tomorrow at the post-commission meeting, as they hear this presentation, have their own discussions, they will ask for what the feedback was from the advisory committee. And so the concerns that are shared from the committee, I will relate to commission tomorrow so that they have that information to take into account. So,
Mr. Chair, may I?
yes, sir.
Just in general with the consent items, at times we'll get a question such as this one from the field that's significant, and we'll say, hey, we'll put it on for the commission's consideration. It's up to them to give us further direction, and we kind of just put it on as a consent item. In some other instances, I believe you're going to see some today where there are things that we're trying to get some feedback from the commission. Should we be making new regulatory changes to certain things that we think are important? So we put them on as consent, and then if the commission tomorrow or in future meetings says, please go back and rewrite this regulation, then we do. So you're going to see a number of those today, either from post staff, from the field, and sometimes from the commission. You're going to see one today on dishonesty that the commission has said, hey, come back to us with some discussion topics on dishonesty in terms of certification. So that's the purpose of some of these consent items.
Thank you, Dr. Alvarez. Any additional questions or comments from the committee then? I would just add as well, I support this in concept, and but I also agree that it should require a background update and the time constraints be, carefully monitored. But I do support the idea. I think it would be helpful to agencies. So,
just have a quick comment. I just want to confirm that this is for all peace officers, every rank.
This was presented by Chief Avalar, so I'm not sure the goal. I think it was for individuals who were recently hired and maybe just didn't pass probation. And so for reasons other than discipline, and they want to move them. So I don't know, maybe Manny wants to speak to that, but.
Yeah, I was the one that spoke with Chief Avalar. She did not speak to rank. Her concern was primarily when somebody had just been hired, had a background done, and 3 months later they failed out of field training for whatever reason. She said, why do we have to do a whole new background if the other department is willing to share their background? I think she had, in my discussion with her, I had mentioned the interim chief, and I said, well, that requires an update. So she was aware of that. She wasn't necessarily opposed to that, but it was primarily for brand new personnel. It wasn't for laterals, that somebody had been hired 10 years before and now is laterally over to another department. It was primarily dealing with those that had just had a background.
Okay, thank you for that report. Okay, our next presentation will be on proposed amendments to commission regulations to address course complaints and instructor conduct. I will call upon law enforcement consultant Andrew Mendonça, Training Program Services, who will provide a report on this item.
Morning. I don't need to turn this on, right? Okay, we're good. Just for level setting, this is being driven internally. These are some things that we think we found internally that we could improve. And this is just for discussion. So if the committee is interested, we'll take it before commission. If the commission is interested, then we would propose some regulations at some point in the future. No problem. I will do my best. And also I speak quickly when I read, so I will try to slow down. All right. Good morning. My name is Andrew Mendonça. I'm an LEC in Training Program Services. Staff is seeking input from the advisory committee on the adoption of new regulations to address instructor conduct and performance in post-certified courses. After a thorough review of existing regulations and policies, staff believes that there are some areas which could be improved. Staff reviewed Commission Regulation 1057, which addresses decertification and suspension of courses, and Post Policy TDC 4, which governs course complaint process. Some of the needed areas for improvement include Regulation 1057 is limited only to course certification and does not specify a code of conduct or performance expectations for instructors. Regulation 1057 limits suspension or decertification to courses only when there's no longer demonstrated need, there's a failure to comply with the course certification requirements, or other reasons as determined by the commission. TDC 4 is an internal policy which guides post staff, but is not binding on presenters or instructors. TDC 4 contains no requirement that presenters agree to conduct an investigation or abide by any instructor code of conduct. Neither Regulation 1057 nor TDC 4 addresses performance-related issues identified through complaints or the QAP process, and neither Regulation 1057 nor TDC 4 address instructor complaints or performance issues across multiple presenters. So those circumstances where you have an instructor who teaches for multiple presenters. Staff recommends that regulations be adopted which more specifically address instructor conduct and the responsibilities of the presenter when complaints are received. Staff also recommends that any new regulation include an element which speaks to instructor performance during a certified course and provides clearer guidance. Staff is seeking feedback on whether the commission and the committee wish to move forward with any further evaluation and any issues we should consider.
Okay, any questions or comments on this item for Andrew? Yes, Mr. Cordova.
Thank you for that presentation. When you refer to instructors, are we talking about internal training instructors or the California Community College Academy instructors?
So these are, sorry, I'll do my best to, you're welcome. These are any instructors in any of our post-certified courses.
Okay. And that could be included, offered at the California Community College location?
Absolutely.
Okay. There might be some conflicts of interest in that when you start talking about the bargaining units.
Okay.
Ms. Morrell?
Tammy Morrell, representing CADA. I think this is necessary, and I think it is extremely complicated.
Agreed.
The bargaining units would be an issue with my instructors. My instructors are adjunct faculty at our college, and so they're represented by the California Teachers Association local branch. Having said that, we all know that there may be some instructors that no longer belong in the classroom. And if an agency or an academy isn't willing to address complaints, I believe there should be a mechanism in place to do that.
Yeah, Pacheco CPOA, I could not agree more. We've all been to classes where instructors probably should not be in the classroom. And let's be honest, staff goes to these classes not always as an attaboy, but due to maybe some training opportunities they're in need of. If they get the wrong instructor and there's no accountability there, that can actually hurt careers. I've seen it more than a few times. Even with my own agency, they go to a class and the instructor was just saying the wrong thing. And if there's no true accountability or level of standard, they can actually hurt careers. So I think it is going to be very complicated, but worth the commission's time.
I'll just add my voice to that choir. I agree wholeheartedly.
And Andrew, if you want, probably mention that, I don't think it came out in the presentation about, we have instructors that oftentimes work at multiple presenters.
Yeah, I mentioned that briefly. So one of the sort of conflating factors here is we've had circumstances where we'll have an instructor complaint in one particular context, and it's just not clear what we do with that for an instructor who may be teaching at multiple places. Is that what you meant?
Yeah, and the legality of, or, you know, having something regulatory that allows us to take action across the board, no matter where they teach, if they're inappropriate in the classroom or due to QAP reviews, that they're not performing to a level they should be. At one presenter, most likely they're not performing to that level at another one. And we want to be able to really focus on the instructor, not just the presenter.
Ask a question about that?
Yes.
So that would seem to indicate that there'd be some need for instructor certification that could be revoked if certain cause existed. Is that what you're suggesting?
We've talked about that a lot. We've
Yeah,
had a lot of conversation, and I'm not sure we're in full agreement on that in the building even, on what the best course of action is. As Ms. Morel said, it's very complicated. It's not as easy as just, you know, rolling something out even associated with the colleges, but
Sure.
But Andrew, you might want to talk more about that.
Yeah, the only thing I would say is absolutely, it's complicated. And that's not meant to be patronizing. That's meant just to understand that one of the conversations we've had is, what is the appropriate unit of measure? Do we, as the commission, you know, or are we focused on the presenter? In which case we have some levers that we can pull with the presenter. We no longer certify your course, or we do something else and we make this, you know, it's contingent upon good behavior on the part of the instructors. I think it gets exponentially more complicated if we start talking about the instructor as the unit of measure, where we're certifying individual instructors and sort of this, you know, quasi SB2 post-ad address of record, you know, sort of what's our relationship directly with the instructors. I think that implicates some pretty significant other issues that we may not have if our unit of measure is the presenter. And so this is exactly the kind of feedback that we're soliciting about what's the appropriate unit of measure for who is our regulated body? Is our regulated body the presenter? Is our regulated body the instructors? Who should it be? And what are some considerations that we need to have depending on which way we approach it? Is that fair? I'm looking at Toby. We've had a number of these conversations as well.
We have, yeah. Good morning. William Darden. Everyone calls me Toby. I'm Chief Counsel. The discussions that we've had have to do with the questions of what happens at Post if we start certifying individual instructors and we have a relationship with an individual as an instructor. And then in some ways it could be seen that we're taking ownership of that person or that person's ability to teach. And it raises a number of issues, including due process issues, if we then take this instructor's ability away on a statewide basis to perform because they had a problem at a particular presenter site or at one particular presentation. So currently, how our regulations work is our leverage is with the presenter, and we tell the presenter, we are approving your presentation of the course, and you have to tell us who your instructors are. If there is a problem with a particular instructor, then it goes back to the presenter. We don't want you putting on this presentation with this instructor who's engaging in this bad behavior. And we have that leverage consistently and thoroughly by means of the presenter. It does take it to a whole different level if we are going to instead have a bunch of relationships with individual persons who we are somehow going to certify as post instructors and then would be able to if we got information that they had behaved, let's say, badly in one particular course, it raises legal issues. Are we now going to say, well, because of that one issue, would we have a series of hearings if we're going to deprive that person of their right to teach? Well, I wouldn't say a right, but of their ability to teach these post-certified courses. So it certainly does make it much more problematic if we go that route. The other problem is, as I understand it, and Andrew, you can please correct me if I'm wrong, but there are some instances in which we'll have someone come in to a course that may only teach one time, let's say one course, one particular time. And then are we going to go to this route of saying, well, you can't teach this 1 4-hour course unless you are a post-approved instructor, and how do we get them approved as an instructor in order to do that? Or if you have someone coming in, Andrew, tell me tell me if I'm wrong, I thought that it is also that we take into account things like, when you have role playing in the field and you have folks that come in that serve as participants in these role playing exercises. So those are some of the reasons that from a legal perspective, it gets very complicated.
Yeah, who we define as course personnel obviously then matters and, has implications.
I can completely appreciate that complexity, and I wouldn't be an advocate for adding a whole bunch of certification requirements to instructors. The question I have, that seems to be a little bit easier to deal with the presenter if it's in-service training and they're offering, particular training. With regard to the regular basic academy, where perhaps you have a instructor who's teaching a particular learning domain, and they're doing, they need not to be doing that anymore because of that. Can you, in essence, decertify, lack of a better way to describe it, the presentation of that LD without disrupting the entirety of the regular basic academy? Or is it the presentation of the entire academy that you have to go after?
We'd have to have our basic training bureau address that. Andrew, I don't know if you've worked with BTB on that issue, but my thought is it would be the same as it would be in a normal presenter that we would talk about a particular instructor, but I don't know for sure.
I would have to defer to basic training. I believe the entire academy is certified as a course. I don't think it's broken up into individual.
We actually just have our BTB person coming up.
Oh,
Maybe that's the area you go to, right?
So Jennifer Hardesty is in basic training. She's one of the managers in basic training, can maybe address the question.
So we don't certify each LD individually. It is certified as the course itself. So I would say if we find the issue after that presentation is done, it's not going to impact the remainder of that course. It would just impact presentations going forward. So they would have to make that correction before they could run the course again.
Yeah, I think that's part of the interest is it feels blunt, right? 1057 is you either certify the course or you don't certify the course. And really it's not surgical enough to then, talk about individual, performance within that course. And I think that's, at least from my perspective, being in training program services, I don't deal with RBCs. My courses are much smaller, but I've run into similar circumstances where we have, a week-long or 2-week-long course, and the person responsible is only responsible for a small portion of that course. And the question is, short of, threatening the presenter with decertifying the entire program, but for that one instructor, which seems, maybe is not always necessary. Now, I think we've always had really good cooperation and working relationships with the presenters. And when we've presented an issue, they've worked with us to resolve the issue. But that's largely, maybe I'm misspeaking, but I think that's largely out of goodwill. I don't know that we necessarily had that regulatory handle that we could pull, push comes to shove, absent decertifying the course in its entirety.
And we do have the ability to suspend courses also. So that's something we've used if we find major issues, it's, if you don't correct it, then we may have to suspend your course for a time period, just to give you time to get that corrected. So that is another avenue besides just going right to decertification. We can suspend courses as well.
And to be clear, we're not asking for a solution, here now. There's lots of issues that we think are going to be implicated by this. The question is, conceptually, and it sounds like it is, conceptually, is this something worth exploring a little bit more so that we can, start to work through some of these concerns and issues around bargaining and maybe some, areas that just quite frankly, we need to make sure that we're considering before we make any regulatory change. Yeah.
Ms. Morrell.
Tammy Morrell. Is the plan to have a subject matter expert committee address this, or post staff look into it and bring it back, or what's the plan moving forward for this?
So this is
If
the
there's-
start of the plan. We have already started to look at a few of these issues and had some discussions about, conceptually, what might this process look like? And as we discussed, what's the appropriate unit of measure? Is it the presenter? Is it the instructor? That's going to largely drive some of the considerations. I'm open to feedback. I mean, if you think, this is worthy of getting a group together to flesh out some of these issues prior to any proposed regulatory change, then that's certainly something we can explore.
I think it might be, and I'm going back to when we had the AICC problems, and we had different people An AICC is the Academy Instructor Certification course. And it's a requirement for people to teach in regular basic courses in modular academies. And we were having an issue where agencies were taking a lot of the slots. And so those of us who ran academies couldn't get slots. And so it ended up kind of a revamp of the AICC program. And I see this about as complicated as that. I think it's going to be more than one meeting and one set of recommendations personally.
Sure.
It's a complicated issue.
It is, I agree.
Dr. Elders, did you comment?
I actually have a question, if I may, for members, committee members Cordova and Morel. What would happen at the college level if an individual, let's say that there was a certification program for instructors, or they were removed, they were not permitted to participate in post-training? What would happen to them, just out of curiosity? Because that is generally where we hear the pushback. It's, hey, this person is tenured, we can't move them out of the position. What would happen?
So it would go into the collective bargaining agreement discussion, and the faculty member would potentially be displaced. If they're not eligible to teach alternative classes, then they would be displaced from their current role and assignment, and potentially go through termination if the college cannot replace them or reassign them.
How those collective, and I know I'm getting in an area that's really not our business, but how localized are those collective bargaining agreements? So for instance, with police departments now, a lot of them are putting into their job description that in order to be a peace officer at their department, they have to maintain their certification or they cannot be employed there any longer. If it was an instructor, let's say for the regular basic course, the academy, or for in-service, could that be something that could be addressed through a collective bargaining agreement, that in order to maintain their employment at the college, they would have to maintain their good standing with post? Or is it a statewide thing that?
It would be individually, it's individually collective bargaining with each district itself. So I think that could be a discussion. I don't know how relevant it would actually be and make it into, because you're looking at the bigger picture when you start talking about the collective bargaining. There are what they call minimum qualifications for the faculty members, and those minimum qualifications really set the expectations of the course allowed that they're subject matter, experts in and teaching. So I don't know if that's a possibility or not. Tammy?
I can speak on behalf of the California Academy Directors Association, and I think everybody knows that almost half of the academies are college academies. And so I am one of them. I'm a director of one of them, and most of the faculty in the college academies are not tenured. They're usually adjuncts or some other classification. Some people call them paraprofessionals, some call them professional experts. So there's different classifications of people, but to answer your question, it would have to be individually negotiated at each college, at each district, not necessarily each college, but at each district.
And I think Tammy makes a great point in regards to the actual classification of the instructor. If they are tenure tracked or if they are adjunct, there's a little bit of flexibility with your adjuncts.
Yeah, with me, I only have two tenured instructors. Everybody else, all of their 58 instructors are all adjuncts. And so if it were a problem, and fortunately have not had to deal with this, but if I would just stop using them and I would put somebody else in the position. So a lot would depend on whether they're adjuncts or tenured faculty, because tenured faculty, pretty much you have to find someplace else to put them.
But I mean, to be clear, I don't think this is an issue. The regulations, the policies have been in place for a while. I don't think this is I don't want to say a hugely burning issue. I mean, I think our presenters do a really good job of managing their instructors. But these are just some areas that we've identified that maybe could use some improvement.
I think it's a more burning issue than you're giving it credit for.
Well, then it's timely.
I will say that I know that, within the past few years, there's been some bad information put out in courses. And I think I know what the sheriff is referring to, and it was really difficult to address because the presenter was a private presenter and they believed in what they said, and they were an attorney. And yet, in my case, our district attorney disagreed with them. And so there was a lot of confusion. And this was a use of force issue, so it was important.
Right.
And so I feel like there's got to be some mechanism in place that when you have something that is fundamentally, the opinions are different amongst jurisdictions, there's got to be a mechanism in place so that the confusion doesn't get thrown out there. I'm not doing a very good job because I'm trying to not name names and be specific. But Sheriff, maybe you could speak more on that.
Yeah, I mean, so I use a community college academy, and I've run into the same problem where we've had, in many cases, and I know that the situation you're talking about, but cases where you've had people who've been retired for many, many, many years, and the relevant experience that they have is no longer relevant to the world that we live in today. And they spend a lot of time telling war stories or talking about how they would have done it back in the 80s and 90s and so forth, and have been, even with adjunct professors, been told that there's some seniority-based system, at least in the community college district that I'm affiliated with, that precludes that. And that has resulted in us having to be, law enforcement agencies in Butte County saying, we're not going to use your academy anymore unless you address the problem and getting post involved. And that's why I do think that it's a timely issue. I do think that we need to be able to address that. And I can appreciate the certification challenges of the individuals, but I would hate to see an entire regular basic academy decertified or not being able to be presented based on one or two individuals that need to go.
Yeah, I mean, we'd like a sense of proportionality to it. And we're just, I don't know that we have that ability right now. So.
Quick question.
Oh,
Sorry, go ahead.
oh, I've just got some comments if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, so just curious, out of curiosity, how has the collaboration been going so far with the host? So if you have an instructor that's not meeting expectations, how has that collaboration and discussion been?
So I can only speak to my experience having dealt with this. It's been very positive. I mean,
Okay.
our presenters wish to maintain certification. I think ultimately they understand that, under 1057, we do have the regulatory authority to either suspend or decertify a course for failing to meet the requirements of the course certification. So it's been collaborative. I think it gets a little bit more complicated when we're talking about private presenters, particularly if we're talking about private presenters where the complaint is against the owner of the company and they may be the only person. I know that's caused some friction in the past, which I think we've sort of been able to work through with the existing structure. But I think it just really highlights some of the gaps that we have right now. But generally speaking, I feel like our relationship with our presenters is really positive, and quite honestly, most of our presenters are just as interested in putting on effective, good courses as we are in having them put on effective, good courses. And so whatever they can do to ensure that that happens, I'm thinking specifically about like our QAP program, the quality assurance program. When we give them feedback about their instructors, they're really good about adopting that feedback and making sure that they make the changes that we've asked of them. But again, a lot of that is by just sort of good, a good working relationship with them. Yeah.
Thank you.
So
Stalker.
Yeah, Brent Stalker with CPTMA. I have a couple questions and probably some points. And I apologize, I'll probably be repeating what others have already brought up, but probably the first thing that I'd like to at least think about is how would the complaint process work? So for instance, I think it would be problematic if it was just one person versus several people, if that makes sense. I think if we narrow it down to if simply one person complains about the instructor, is that going to trigger something here at Post?
Sure.
Versus, I think it would be better to see multiple people or complaints, however that gets decided, whether it's 2, 3. So I think that would be definitely a consideration to take in. Otherwise, if you know what I mean by that. I mean, you can have one student that just doesn't like it for whatever reason, and I don't think that would be fair for the instructor to have something triggered at Post just for one if that makes sense what I'm saying on that.
It does.
Just like we have already talked about, I think it is going to be very problematic with community colleges. And it, you know, even though it's a post-certified course, I think if Post steps in and says, you know, we don't believe this instructor should be teaching, I would almost assure that the community college is going to be calling Post and trying to find out what's going on. I don't know if I'm correct on that, but I just see that very problematic. And I should have said this earlier. I think this is great. This absolutely needs to be done because I think our main goal, especially in California, is to have the best instructors we can teaching post courses. So I'm happy to see this. And I'm just bringing up these points because I just kind of find that problematic. And so with the community colleges, again, I think just like Tammy was saying earlier, I think a lot of our instructors for community colleges are part-time, and that's probably the only, you know, they either just teach at the police academy. It's not like they're teaching on the main campus. So I think that may ease the problem a little bit. So the other question that I had, I guess, for you, or maybe a point, is what happens if the coordinator or the course presenter disagrees and says, hey, I don't know what everybody's saying. This is the best instructor, you know, that we have, and we're, you know, good, and we're going to keep going, you know, down this route with this instructor. That would be, you know, something that I think we have to have something in place with, you know, if you do get that disagreement, you know, how would that be?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's premature to get into, you know, how we conceptualize this as happening in practice, but certainly a consideration, you know, we can consider. I mean, we do have a regulation right now that if a peace officer is decertified, that they can't teach in a course. Has that created, maybe that's a question for the community colleges, has that created any bargaining issues yet? Maybe it's too early to know.
I have not had that happen.
Okay.
But it would be, in my mind, it would be helpful because we have a reason for not using them.
Got it. Okay.
Just a couple more things. And again, these could be either looked at as a point or a question. So, but I guess I would also be like, who would handle these complaints? Let's just say Post gets it. Who would you send? Would it be somebody from Post? Would it be QAP? Who would it be that would go down and take a look at this instructor? And again, my point would be, how would that work? You know, how would that happen?
Right now, the responsibility is put back on the presenter initially.
Yeah.
So by policy, we put it back on the presenter unless there's a reason not to. For some reason, they're either incapable or unwilling to conduct the investigation. Depends on the nature of the complaint as well. So if it's, you know, conduct related versus performance related, it may be, you know, amenable to a QAP evaluation. It may not be, depending on the nature of the allegations.
Which I think is great. I think every presenter should have the ability to fix whatever, you know, comes their way. So I think that's good. And again, this is more of a statement. I already know Post has this authority, but in my opinion, if it's a serious complaint, Post needs to have the authority to quickly suspend that course if somebody is just not going along with the program. And again, I know Post has that, but I mean, it's one of those things where again, I know this is early, but you know, if Post is trying and trying and trying, and they're just not making any headway with whatever it may be, I just feel like Post needs it. They just have to go in there and say, okay, we're suspending the course until this gets fixed or until we can look at it. Because I think that alone is probably going to generate quite a bit results, you know, if that makes sense. And then just my last point is, and I know, again, this is difficult for any presenter, especially community colleges, but, you know, I would encourage to have multiple instructors, you know, for topics. And again, I know that's complicated. Everybody's looking at me like, I don't know. And I get that. But I think you know, first is like, if you have like a specific LD that's being taught, you know, and you've got one instructor that's just not cutting it, you know, at that point, they would have the ability to at least remove or suspend that instructor for a little bit while they look at it, while somebody else steps in versus completely just shutting down the whole class. You know, I mean, that's ideally in a perfect world, that would be great. I know that's, you know, again, problematic, but just food for thought on that.
Sure. Jim Grakow, Assistant Executive Director. So just to make it clear, we do have a process right now. And as Andrew mentioned, it's an internal process. It's a policy. And so the agency, when we get a complaint, regarding an instructor or a presenter, they have 60 days. We put in a letter, send it to generally like the director or whoever's oversees the training. On private presenters, it's usually the owner of the company that'll get it. And they have 60 days to conduct an investigation into the allegations and report back to Post on the findings. If they can't do it in the 60 days, which sometimes happens any more time, or it's a very serious allegation where maybe they have to hire an investigation firm, additional time can be given for them. And so that's all codified in a policy right now. So what we're looking to do is really get direction on, should we have a regulation where we have more teeth? So in the event, would it be a private presenter, as Andrew mentioned, where the owner of the company, for instance, is the problem? And if we stop them from instructing and tell them that we're going to decertify their course if they instruct, but yet they're the owner, it becomes problematic of how can we actually make sure that person's not out there teaching. They may not be on a roster, they may not be listed as instructor anymore, and it's just a little bit problematic. So what we're looking to do is both what Andrew said of should we focus on the instructor cadre as well as just the presenter that we currently do now, and then should we codify something in regulation that is currently within our policy and we operate off of. So we do use it all the time. Basic Training Bureau probably gets about 10 or so a year of allegations of conduct or inappropriate behavior that comes back from one student that fails out of a course maybe. And so they conduct their investigation and they ultimately come to a finding sometimes that there was no wrongdoing, that it was the instructor did everything they should have, or the staff. And those are codified and saved in files. So it does exist. We're just trying to make it, whether it be regulatory in case we get pushback at some point and we don't have that agreement from the presenter to take action, that we have something more codified to take back to the commission ultimately, if need be, as an appeal process. So.
Okay, any additional questions or comments from the committee? Okay, seeing none. Andrew, thank you for that report. All right, our next item is a report on the quality assessment program. At this time, I'll call upon Bureau Chief Brad Newmeyer, Training Program Services, who will provide a report on this item.
Good morning. This presentation will definitely dovetail the one we just had. It's kind of folds right into it. So the quality assessment program is a contracted service through South Bay Regional Consortium, where we provide a third-party validation that presenters are delivering the best courses with the best instruction they have. We work with the program manager, law enforcement consultant Bill Baldwin works for me. He works with the program manager at South Bay. And we send quality assessment out typically for 4 reasons. The first one is courses listed in the catalog. When we first took over the program a couple of years ago, when I took over the program, we saw a hole where there were agency-specific courses that aren't in the catalog that weren't getting QAP'd. So we split our money kind of between the ones in the program or in the course catalog that are listed for everyone to go to. And then those ones that are kind of behind a curtain where it's agency personnel at an agency facility with agency instructors, we felt those students might not complain all the way up to Post. They might complain locally, but it wouldn't get back to us. So we tried to split our money to get it out to more courses that weren't being seen, which bore some results. The third way is typically if there's a complaint or some issue with the course, we can send as part of a complaint process the QAP out to evaluate the course. It's a full evaluation. So when the QAP goes out, we request all the course documents that have been approved by the course presenter, which could be any one of the regional reps or consultants in the building. That involves all those things that we might or might not know. If you're at a vacation, you might not be aware of post-process. You have to turn in all the instructor resumes, a course outline, a safety plan, an hourly distribution, and if warranted, a budget, so they get paid back. So they look at all those documents, confirm those are all in line with course procedures, and then specifically they'll go out and there's an evaluation of every instructor that would talk at a particular presentation. If there's 10 instructors over a week-long course, all 10 instructors will get a full evaluation by the assessor. The assessors are trained in our Postmaster Instructor program, the Instructor Development Institute, which is a 4-phase training that takes typically about 2 years to complete. It's hundreds of hours long. And at the end of that training, they're trained up on the course process through Post and on adult learning styles, and the best ways to teach with learning breakout groups, small breakout groups, facilitate discussion, all those things that make good instruction. And every single instructor is assessed through the program. So let's see. I'm sorry if I'm talking too fast. So basically at the end of this year, based on approximately $700,000 in our budget, which my instructor, as second director, might be mad at me for saying that we could use $1 million or $1.5 million because we could get more out there, but money's tight. We were able to do 74 course evaluations this year through the program of varying lengths. Could be a 4-hour online course all the way up to an 8-hour in-person course. We kind of split it evenly through the longer and shorter courses. Of those, 148 instructor evaluations have been submitted with all 5 phases that are reviewed by the master instructors, with over 660 recommendations for improvement and 3,768 instructional hours that were assessed. For some stats for this year, there were 12 particular instances where there were unsatisfactory performance by an instructor. We definitely work with the goodwill of the presenter because we have no regulatory teeth to tell them to remove that person. In 4 of the cases, the presenter, based on the report, just simply stopped using that instructor without direction from us. They just said, we're not going to stop using that instructor. The other 8, in the letter we typically send back, there could be problems with other parts of it. The outline could be wrong. They might not have an instructor resume. That's the regulatory mistakes that need to be corrected by regulation. But the instructor issue is the harder one. And of those 8 remaining, we typically will say, fix all these other things. And before this instructor goes back to teach again, they have to get additional training. We'll suggest courses. If they take the course, they can be reinstated as a teacher. We don't have any power, authority to pull them out. We just ask that they no longer be used until they get additional training or till the issues that we see are resolved. It could be something that doesn't require training, like professionalism, like unscrupulous use of the F word, for example, just unprofessional. You really can't train that out of someone. You just have to have a professional talk with them and say, it can be used for an emphasis, but you can't use it as a teaching tool. And if you stop that, we're fine, right? If the person refuses to do that, it might lead to a further instruction to stop using that person because they're unprofessional. If it's the techniques of it or facilitation skills or time management or whatever, sometimes a training course can address that, right? So we'll ask them to pull that person out because it's unsatisfactory. When they get additional training, we'll allow them to reinstitute that person into their course. And typically we'll send QEP out a second time to ensure that the corrections were made. If not, we'll tell them to remove them again and have a further discussion and maybe remove them completely because they're not getting it. So of those 8 remaining, 3 completed additional training and returned to the footprint, and 5 are still pending. And this year so far, we have actually decertified 1 course after completion of the QEP, and we're in the process of decertifying a second as we speak. It'll be done in the next week or 2. And that completes my description of the QAP and what the QAP works, how the QAP works.
Any questions, comments from the committee? Mr. Ehrman.
I do. I'm curious. I've taught for private companies that develop their own curriculum and post certified, and they just kind of plug you in there. And when you evaluate the course, do you separate the possibility that the course is just poorly constructed and that the instructor is just doing the best with the materials they have, or?
So that's like a 2-piece question. So the course is certified based on the documents provided, and it's provided by someone who's never seen the actual course being instructed. And that's the one thing with course certification, that we're just seeing documents of how you promised to present it. But we don't really know how that's being taught, whether it's death by PowerPoint or if there actually are good techniques like breakout groups and facility discussions and all that until we put someone in the classroom to see how they're doing it. Typically, if it's a new course, specifically with a private presenter who's looking to get reimbursement from Post, there's a requirement that they're placed in what's called Plan NA, which is a non-reimbursed course by Post, until it is evaluated by QAP and seen as a course that we're willing to put into a plan to pay for students to attend through one of the other plans, 1 through 7, depending on the course. So that's a crucial part of QAP, where we will actually QAP new courses to ensure that they're good content, they're being put on well, and they can get feedback as a plan NA on instructor issues or facility issues or whatever it might be before they move into a plan where we start paying them, because that's their chance to show that it's a quality course. So I would say that, the QAP looks at all those sectors. And in the past, and I want to say this for the record, most people would describe this as an instructor like coaching. It's not. It's a third-party validation that it's a quality course or it's not, and you're doing the job or you're not. So I want to dispel any myths that there might be that this is a coaching or a teaching product. It's actually a verification that you do it well, and we give you suggestions to correct your activities and your teaching. And if not, we'll require additional training. And if you don't get it, we might actually ask that person be removed. So the previous discussion ties right into this. We don't really have a lot of authority to remove an instructor. We absolutely work with the goodwill of our presenters, and they've been nothing but cooperative because they don't want us looking at their instructors as poor and unsatisfactory, and they will typically send them to a training course. Very few courses require training before they go, except for the academy courses. They have to take the AICC, and we do not QAP any academy courses or FTO courses or 830E2, the basic training courses. It's just advanced officer courses that we actually will put into the program. That's left to the Basic Training Bureau to control through all of their processes.
Chella Cottrell here. My question, I guess, would be if you are decertifying courses, do you share that information with other state entities? For example, Cal OES will sometimes give an annual training allotment to send dispatchers to courses that are not post reimbursable. So my concern would be that post has identified problematic course, identify that it needs to be decertified and not be reimbursed through post. Are we then sharing that information with Cal OES so that they're not inadvertently sending dispatchers to those courses that you've identified are problematic?
We don't publicly notify people of course problems. We deal with the presenter directly and have them correct it. And then if they don't correct it to our satisfaction, that is a possibility that we could either place their course on modification until it's corrected, or we decertify their course formally.
But we can't do any information sharing across state agencies.
That probably for the council in the room. I'll pitch that to you, sir.
Okay, sure. So the question is if we have information about a particular instructor or presenter at one location, whether or not we could share that with other individuals throughout the state? Was that the question?
With other. See if the mic likes it better this way. Not with other individuals, but with other state agencies. What my concern is that post will identify a course which is problematic and should not be certified or reimbursed for whatever reason. But then the course is still being offered, just not under the post guidelines or reimbursement structure. And we can then get paid by Cal OES to attend. So what I would hate to have happen is for us to continue to send folks to it in good faith, not understanding this was decertified, thinking this is good instruction. So my question is, if we do identify something that should be decertified from state agency to state agency, can you share that information?
That's interesting. Thank you for the clarification. I guess I understand a little bit better. So if we decertify a course, we do list it. We do explain to the commission, and in a consent item, we do list that course as being decertified. Isn't that right, Brad?
I'm not quite sure, to be honest with you, sir.
Yeah.
No, we don't bring that publicly, no.
Okay. So the listing that we bring in consent is just the number of courses that are decertified. Is that right then? It's not the identification of the specific course. It's an interesting question. It's something we have to look at. It would obviously raise some legal concerns if we were effectively casting aspersions or explaining, taking a position that we believed a particular presenter had violated law or regulation and made that public without giving them some due process. So we'd have to think about that.
And I think one way to avoid that would just be to not send people to non-post certified courses, because those are the ones we can certify and confirm the quality of instruction, or at least the course has been approved by post. But if you send them to stuff that's outside of our purview, we have no control over what they teach and the quality of the course. And I would just say if you want a post-certified course and the curriculum's confirmed and it's taught well, I think we're a better resource than someone who's not necessarily in our footprint.
Any additional questions, comments? Okay, seeing none. Thank you, Mr. Newmeyer, for that presentation. Before we move on to our next presentation, I just want to check in with our court reporter before we move into a couple longer items, see if you need a break or. Okay, we'll take a shot. So next item will be consent item 2G, report on certification decertification update. And at this time, I call upon Bureau Chief Mike Radford from the Professional Conduct LA County Bureau and Bureau Chief Michelle Weiler from the Certification Bureau, who will provide a report on this item.
Good morning, everyone. Chris, can we put that PowerPoint up? I'm going to start us off with an overview of our year-to-date statistics on peace officer certification numbers, and then hand it off to my peer here, Mike Bradford. Hopefully the PowerPoint comes up soon. So these first slides are the typical information that we've been presenting each meeting. Oh, I guess we're changing things up. We'll switch it.
All right, so to go along with our PowerPoint, I'll start off with the professional conduct statistics. Again, my name is Mike Radford. I'm the Bureau Chief in charge of our Los Angeles County Division of Professional Conduct. So we'll talk about all of the current statistics that will go from the time that we started our collection of misconduct as of November 1st of 2024. So the first slide, we show all of the report or allegations that Post has received from agencies. So you'll see that we have, as of November 1st, 30,422 total misconduct reports that we've received. And these reports include the initial misconduct, including supplements, follow-ups, et cetera. We broke those down between 2024 and 2023. You'll notice that 2023 obviously is much larger due to the mandate in the law that required the retroactive reporting. So 34,732 reported allegations, and these are different misconducts that agencies have reported on law enforcement officers. So it is possible that there could be more than one. We have 2, 3, as many misconducts that can be listed on one particular incident. So there is more allegations and reports just due to multiple misconducts that they are reporting. And out of those reports, we've received 1,337 public complaints. And each public complaint we process and usually move towards the agency for their responsibility for reporting. Next slide. Okay. Our professional conduct statistics, again, out of all of these reports, we've created 20,700 total cases. So of these cases, we'll break that down. 11,961 are what we call open cases. So either with an agency or here with Post. So breaking that down even further, you'll see that 9,437, or we say 79% of the cases, are open with Post. And I do want to add that we classify each case in a priority status. We have a 1 through 4 priority. 1 meaning it's a sustained case that we feel is of significant value that we need to investigate with the possibility of decertification or action. Priority 2 is a sustained case from an agency that we feel might be lower and may not rise to a level of any action taken by Post. We have a priority 3, which usually comes in as a not sustained, unfounded, demonstrably false case from the agency. Those are the vast majority of cases that we currently have and are trying to look at each one, validate that the investigation was done competently, fairly, and confirming that. So that's the large amount of our open cases that we're working with right now. Priority 4s are the cases that we did not have jurisdiction. They were the retroactive cases. So 21% of our cases, over 2,500, are still open, but with the agency. So the agency was required to report to us the misconduct within 10 days. And then we just wait on them to complete their investigation and report to Post their ultimate findings. Of all the cases that's come to Post, 42%, or over 8,700, have been closed in total. So we'll break down these cases a little more. So cases with sustained findings. So the agency has found a sustainment and has sent that to Post, but Post or PostStat has closed these particular cases. So to break those down as to why we have closed them out. So 48% of the cases that came to Post as sustained, we found or we deemed as not serious misconduct. So what could that be? More than likely, if a sustainment for a policy violation, or perhaps it's a misconduct that doesn't meet the definitions of 13.510.8 in one of those conducts, we'll deem those as not serious misconduct. Some of the cases that are sustained from agencies will also rise to a level of preponderance of evidence, but PostStat has to reach, or Post has to find a level of clear and convincing, which is a higher standard. So there is many cases, we have 34% that we received that are sustained, but does not meet the clear and convincing standard that Post requires. And then 18% are cases that, though they were sustained, we deemed as not actionable. And those could be, again, cases that were prior and not actionable. They could also be the policy violation cases, et cetera. So those are the breakdown of cases that come to us sustained, but we close them out on our end. Next slide. Oh, one back, please, Chris. Thank you.
Okay, I'm just gonna let Chris do it.
Oh, you have it.
Yeah, I have the clicker. I think we're both hitting it. That's why it's moving
Of the closed cases with sustained findings from agencies, this just breaks it down as to where did this misconduct occur. And you'll see that 73% of the cases that are sustained were due to on-duty misconduct, and 27% are off-duty misconduct. So one of the bits of information that was requested is what type of agency discipline do we usually see when we see the sustained cases coming in. So we broke down the type of discipline that we see on the sustained cases coming in that has been imposed. So we break that down between counseling, no discipline, or sometimes they resign in lieu of. Suspension can be anywhere from a day to up to 30 days. Terminated, written reprimands, and then unknown. So we just break those down into types of discipline that we're receiving from the agencies that we're documenting. So agencies can still have to send us the completion of their investigations, and many of those come back as unfounded or not sustained or not actionable cases. So we'll break those down as to what we see. So the vast majority of cases that come in have been not actionable. Again, that is due to the large amount of the retroactive cases that we had to receive. 35% of the cases that come in not sustained are we deem not serious. And as you see, not sustained means that they couldn't prove that it happened, as well as they couldn't prove it did not happen. So again, each one of those Post takes, we look at it individually to make sure that there is no actual misconduct. And 35% of the cases, we also agree and determine that there's not serious misconduct. And 4% of the time, there was a determination that there was some sort of misconduct, but it does not rise to a level of clear and convincing that Post can move forward with that particular case. So what actions has Post taken on cases that we have determined need some sort of action moving forward? So this breaks down what we have done so far. We've sent 34 notices of intent to decertify to law enforcement officers throughout the state. Of those 34 that we have sent out, 12 have appealed and have been going through the appeals process through the PostStat board, commission, et cetera. 18 of those notifications have gone to default, meaning they have not responded. They decided they did not want to invoke any of their due process, and they went into default. One default suspension, meaning that we, as Post, determined that we sent the intent to suspend. The officer did not respond, so it went to a default suspension. There was a voluntary surrender Each officer does have the opportunity to voluntarily surrender prior to any of the due process, and we are pending 2 responses to date. So of the disciplinary cases that POSAD has moved forward with, this breaks down each one of the allegations that we are seeing. So out of the 34 notices of intent, you'll see that 32% are for acts that violate the law. 34%, which is the majority, is for dishonesty. And then the breakdown of the rest: abuse of power, sexual assault, excessive force, failure to cooperate, and demonstration of bias. And then we also detail to the bottom left the agency discipline on each one of these cases that we are moving forward with. 19 were involved termination. 12 of those cases resulted in the officer resigning, and 1 case where the officer demoted. And again, 18 were on duty, 16 occurred off duty. So our decertification cases that have come before the board has heard 10 cases to date. Of these, we've had 1 recommendation for settlement. We've had 8 recommendations for revocation. That means it's been pushing forward for full decertification. We've had 1 recommendation for suspension. So again, there is an option for the officer or for the boards to recommend suspension rather than just revocation. And we currently have 4 cases. I think there may be more, but as the moment we pulled this, there are still 4 cases that we are pending to be heard at the next POSAD board hearing. So the cases that go from the POSAD board will move next to the POSAD commission. These are all the cases that have been heard before the commission. 6 cases have made it so far. Of those 6, 3 determinations to revoke are being moved forward. Of the 6, 2 have resulted in stipulated settlements. So they will not be moving forward for decertification. There's a settlement that there was an agreement between the officer and the commission for something less, a suspension or a probation. And 1 no action. It went to the commission and the commission determined no action to be taken, and it's stopped at that point. Of all of the cases that have gone through the commission, here is just a list of all the officers, the division recommendations, the hearings and outcomes. And we list the amount of times that the board has reached different determinations than division, and there's only been 1 time that POSAD board and the commission did not agree. There was a difference in determination. So next, any officers that obviously are involved in felony convictions also face disqualification or revocation, and this details officers that have been disqualified based off prior felony convictions. So to date, there were 160 officers that we were notified had felony convictions, immediately putting them into an ineligibility status. Moving forward, any officers that have currently been charged, pled to any type of, well, I say felony, it could also be anything in our 1029 government code that does include some misdemeanors, but they're all listed in that government code. So to date, 112 disqualifications based off, we say felony convictions or the 1029 convictions. And the total number of certifications, revocations based off of that is broken down. So 112 based off of felony convictions are disqualified, with 48 being revocations. And again, the last is just a breakdown of our revocations. Out of the 48 that have been moving forward, 18 resulted in failure for the officers to respond to the intent. They still get notifications of our intent, giving them an opportunity to send us any information that may be different, if we maybe have the wrong information. 18 were from default revocations, and one resulting from failure to file a notice of defense. So just breaking down the total revocations that we have. And that concludes just my statistics of what we have for POSAD to date. We take any questions, or we can.
We have more coming, but any questions or comments in regards to this portion of the, Mr. Honey,
Fine.
Sheriff
Yeah.
Honey?
Yeah, thank you. So I just want to make sure I'm understanding. So you've received to date somewhere around 32,000 complaints or allegations of misconduct. I think that was on the second slide.
34,732 different
34,000.
reported allegations of misconduct.
Involving approximately 18,000 individuals.
Correct.
Got it. And of those 18,000, have you had a chance to look at all of those? Or is there a backlog that you haven't had a chance to look at yet?
There is a backlog.
What's that backlog?
I don't have the
me a
number
ballpark.
throughout. I couldn't tell you a ballpark. We could tell you that those that are open with post are cases that, so of the 9,437 that are open, we break those down in our priority. So as we identify cases that come in that are sustained, those will be our first priority to look at. We triage those and we identify those that may qualify for what we call an immediate temporary suspension. So those are cases where an officer has either been fired, quit in lieu of. So those are the first that we will look at, and then we try to triage and attack those based on the priority.
I appreciate that. I think you used the word nine, or you used the number 9,000. You've looked at 9,000 cases?
No, I cannot tell you how many we've actually looked at, put eyes on. Again, we just try to look.
Let me come into this another way.
Sure.
So you've decertified or in one form or fashion 67 with 34 pending.
Yes.
Yeah. And so I'm trying to understand, I'm trying to understand the ratio between the number of complaints you've received and the number of those individuals that warrant decertification. Is it, if you've only looked at 500 cases, well, that's a lot of cops that got decertified proportionally. If you've looked at 9,000 cases, that's significantly less. So that's what I'm trying to understand.
So again, the amount of cases that we have, we look at each one in priority. Is there cases that perhaps we have not had an opportunity to begin the process of investigation or taking action on? There may be some. So it's difficult to say how many that we have not seen.
Somebody else could answer that question.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for your question.
Thank you.
Member Honey. I think there's a couple of ways to answer that. The
Thank you.
first is unassigned reports. There's
Yeah.
roughly 10,000 unassigned reports.
Okay.
Which means they have not been assigned to an investigator yet to even do the initial screening. So that helps break down some of that. There is also, and we will bring this back for the commission tomorrow, and then that way the committee will have this information, breaking down to the P1s, P2s, P3s, P4s, so you can see where the backlog. I think Bureau Chief Radford mentioned P3s and P4s. Those are cases where the agency did not sustain the violations, or they're retro non-actionable cases. So the cases did not involve the use of deadly force that resulted in SBI or death, dishonesty, or sexual assault. Those have been sitting in a pending status because they don't, at this point, as we know, probably create the greatest risk for the public welfare. So we can tell you how many P3s and P4s. So you'll know those are pending, not closed. They're still considered open cases. But I think the most practical way of looking at this is the 10,000 cases that are still sitting in an unassigned status. The other thing I think I'd like to note, just to put some of this into perspective, is while there has not been as many notices of intent to revoke or suspend, which is really the hearing process, right? There has been 362 actions taken by post total. Those actions involve both the revocations based on a felony or qualifying misdemeanor conviction, or default revocation, ineligibilities, immediate temporary suspensions, which we have roughly about 120. And we've had a total of 63 officers voluntarily surrender throughout the course of these this process. And that can be anywhere from the time the complaint charge or allegation is submitted to post all the way up until the point that they're facing decertification. They can voluntarily surrender at any time. So when you look at that 63, some of it's still in the complaint stages, right? And the officer may get a notice of investigation. When they receive that notice of investigation, that's an opportunity for them, and it's explained in the letter that they can surrender their certification. And they can do that, again, all the way up until the point where their certification is actually revoked. I hope that answers some of it.
Yeah, and that was 300 what?
362 total actions to date, including immediate temporary suspensions, revocations, ineligibilities, surrenders, conditional license, and suspensions. You're welcome.
Anne Marie, if I may, Mr. Chair and Manny Alvarez. So for the ineligibles, the revocations based on convictions, there's still a significant process that's involved in that, correct? Could you just kind of touch on that process? And I think there was a slide up there about an appeal. Could you address that also if they want to appeal that the conviction is not them or whatever it may be?
Sure. So we built in due process for even these convictions. What if we have the wrong name, the wrong officer? What if there's a duplicate person, same name, and we receive conviction data and we associate it with a certification that's not the right individual? So there's two ways that felony convictions or qualifying misdemeanors, I'm gonna make Toby nervous, that can come to post. And one is through a DOJ reporting list that we get monthly that lists all of these qualifying misdemeanors and felony convictions. But we also can have a serious misconduct case that gets reported by an agency, and it could be at the complaint charge or allegation stage. It could also be at the stage where there's been an arrest and we're still waiting for the pending criminal case and the outcome. At such time that becomes that they've been convicted of something that is a 1029 disqualifier, that will also result in perhaps a 1029 revocation. During that process for the DOJ list, let's start there. We will send a letter to the subject officer saying that we've received this conviction information and the court documents associated with it. And we will request if there's any information that we should be aware of that either negates what we've received from DOJ, or there's been further proceedings that would say necessarily void that conviction. They have 30 days within which to respond to us. And at that point, we will then move forward with whatever the corresponding action is. At this point, it goes before the commission on a consent calendar. The commission actually does a vote of those felony convictions. Moving forward, that will not be the case because it is ministerial. It's by operation of law that they no longer can be a peace officer because of the conviction. So moving forward, we will not have this perfunctory vote, if you will, of the commission. But that's the due process. If it comes through, let's say, a complaint by the agency, by the law enforcement agency, and it ultimately results in a felony conviction, there has been notice to the officer at that point that we are investigating it and that there has been an outcome, and that would result in the same kind of review, if you will, if there's something erroneous about the information we received.
So I don't want to go too far down this road, but your comment sparked another question in my mind. How are you notified of the conviction?
Well, DOJ through Corey has a repository of this information. When SB2 first came online, there was this massive dump of information, if you will, or data transfer. Let's make it a little more professional.
From
Two
DOJ
posts
to
from
post.
DOJ. And there was roughly 460 some odd entries in that initial data transfer. That was basically to catch us up. And that's why you see a lot of those ineligible actions. Going forward, we receive it from law enforcement agencies, DAs, and a monthly report from DOJ to keep us current on those convictions.
Was there a particular statutory or regulatory provision that allows you access to criminal history?
1029.
1029.
That allows us to get that information from DOJ. So we're not accessing the Corey data from, I know where you're going, from Post. We are getting Corey derived data from DOJ through a statutory provision. But thank you. That will come up.
So, yeah, I'm wondering how their recent bulletin 24-11 CJIS impacts that.
Interesting timing. Would you like me to handle this or?
I'm sorry, Manny Albers. I
This
see
is-
Toby Darden's light
This is
turning
not the
green.
time to bring
Yes,
it up.
it is.
No, no, no.
It is
No, no, no.
It
Yeah, I
did
know.
spark that
Yeah.
curiosity.
Please, Toby.
Yeah.
So a couple of things. Number one, with Senate Bill 2, the legislature added a specific provision in Government Code 1029 that mandated that DOJ was required to communicate this information to Post. And I had probably a year's worth of discussions with the attorneys at CJIS over there to get that squared away so that DOJ provided that information to us. And it's a long story, but we are getting it now. So with respect to that information, the legislature, I believe it was 1029G, specifically said DOJ is mandated in SB2 to provide that information to us. That information is being provided. So with respect to that information, we are getting that query list. We are clearly statutorily entitled to it. And DOJ isn't questioning, even with this most recent issue with the CLETS bulletin, as to that data. We are statutorily required to get it. The Corey bulletin, which is probably a full discussion for another day, but I'm happy to address it. We're very familiar with that. Fair to say that we internally at Post disagreed entirely with the legal analysis done by the attorneys at CJIS division, and we certainly disagreed, or I did at least, with that bulletin being sent out in the field to every agency in the field. But that is a different issue. The issue arising from the CLETS bulletin goes to two core issues that are part of our mission here at Post. Number one, our audit capability for peace officer background files to determine that officers that have been newly hired have been hired in conformity with all the post-regulatory requirements. That now is a problem under this bulletin, as I know you're aware of, Sheriff. The other issue is the serious misconduct reports that Post is obligated to receive and work on. Many of these reports do involve CLETS information. So just as an example, we have cases where an officer may be improperly accessing CLETS information and then taking that information and giving it to individuals that are not entitled to get that information. That's one very clear example where CLETS access is 100% implicated in whether or not serious misconduct occurred. The problem with the CLETS bulletin is that would say that even with respect to those misconduct reports, the Post should not be able to get that information. So we would get an IA report that was all redacted or blacked out with respect to the primary misconduct, which is at the core of the misconduct report and our need to address it. But so it is analytically a different issue from the 1029 issue, but it is an issue which I could talk to you about for an hour and a half. So we're very familiar with it, and it's something that we are trying to work on right now to see if we can get that issue resolved, because it is a very important issue for Post.
And if I may add, Mr. Chair, I don't mean to digress into the CLETS bulletin, but so obviously there's two avenues to that CLETS bulletin for us. As Toby mentioned, the audits of the personnel files that we do on a regular basis every day to ensure that there's no disqualifying criminal actions in that person's background, as well as to ensure that a DOJ letter has been issued, that they're eligible to possess a firearm. So we've directed staff yesterday to stop reviewing that information, that is now going to be the responsibility of the agency solely. Obviously, the agencies they always look at that. But of the 7,000 or so files that we review every year, there's 3 or 5 issues that come up on a yearly basis. So we've directed the staff not to check those boxes when they do those audits. The other aspect of Senate Bill 2. And as Toby mentioned, when there is information that's sent to us that now agencies are being told not to provide to Post. So we have one specific incident with the department that reported, as they were required to under Senate Bill 2, information of misconduct on a certain individual. And then when we asked for the underlying information, aside from just the cover sheet, the agency refused to provide that. The bulletin, as you note, or as you noticed, also has a direction to the field to issue that Post should be issuing subpoenas for that information. We've started to do that. We did that with that agency. We still think that that is very, very problematic. And as Toby mentioned, we disagree with the findings, the legal analysis by DOJ. We're discussing it with them over the last 3 weeks. Once we saw the bulletin, once we were made aware of that bulletin's existence, we've had a number of discussions with them. At this point, we're still, I don't want to say at loggerheads, but we're all trying to figure out the best direction. Obviously for us, it's critical for our mission to get that information. One, to decertify officers that shouldn't be officers. And you're going to see cases. There's a case coming before the commission on Thursday that addresses, potential CLETS-derived information that an officer, accessed when he shouldn't have, and ultimately, I believe, was fired. And now we're moving forward to decertify that officer. So it's critical. They've been made aware of that, but at this point, we're in a position where we're not allowed to see that information. That's the guidance from DOJ, and we don't want to put any department in jeopardy by providing that information to us. Now, going back to this information, and when we do get those conviction records from DOJ, as Toby mentioned and Anne Marie mentioned, we are getting that information of those appeals. When we do send out a letter at the commission meeting in September, there was an individual who had a disqualifying misdemeanor who contested it and said this should not be a disqualifier. That went before the commission for a review as to, hey, what do we do with this individual? And the commission decided to move that forward to an ALJ to make a determination as to whether that was a disqualifier or not. The whole point of it was there's a lot of labor behind it, primarily for Anne Marie's shop and Toby's shop to get the certified records from the court. We don't just rely on DOJ telling us an individual has been arrested or convicted. Thank you.
Okay, any additional questions or comments on this item? If not, we'll move to Michelle's piece.
Morning again. Well, now my information is going to be really boring. So this is the typical year-to-date statistics that we provide to the commission at the regular meetings, but I know we have a lot of new members, so I'll go ahead and explain each set of data that you're going to see here. Okay. The remote's having technical difficulties. So in the top left-hand corner, I just want to advise that some of the information I provide may be slightly different from the numbers that you got from Mike, Bureau Chief Radford, because these are year-to-date for 2024 only, and they were pulled as of October 31st. So we had a concrete stop date to give you, plus we had to agendize the item. So in the top left-hand corner, you can see is the total number of our current active and inactive certifications of peace officers. The active includes peace officers who may have separated in good standing or not within the last 3 years. If there were no actual certification actions taken by us, they will remain active, as you know, for the 3 years after separation. And then the inactive would include any peace officers who were separated during probation because their proof of eligibility expires upon separation until they are reappointed to an agency. And then it also includes the individuals who have separated for more than 3 years. The top, and then underneath, you'll see the total number of our current peace officers that are full-time. The bottom numbers on the left-hand side, the number of basic certificates we've issued so far this year. The number of appointments approved, that includes brand new peace officers as well as laterals. So when somebody's leaving one agency and moving to another, that counts as a brand new appointment to that agency. And then the number of proofs of eligibility issued, which again is associated with brand new peace officers coming into the field. Perhaps it's a jail deputy, perhaps it's a brand new police officer or deputy, perhaps it's a new reserve appointment who doesn't have a basic certificate from prior full-time service. And then on the right-hand side, the number of affidavits of separation. So you'll see the total number, 6,636 peace officers have separated so far this year. Again, that also includes people who have left one agency to go to another agency because they are counted as a separation from an agency. And we've broken those down for you in the top right-hand corner so you can see what types of separation there are. And then there's a count of how many separations are related to allegations of serious misconduct. And below that is the number of individual officers that the serious misconduct represents. So you can see there's a disparity. Some officers may have multiple allegations of serious misconduct. And then the bottom right side, it's a little harder to see up there because it's smaller, but those are the individual counts of the 9 allegations of misconduct. Again, some of them, the numbers may be accounting for multiple officers, or a single officer may be accounting for multiple allegations, I'm sorry. On the affidavits of separation, I just wanted to give a quick update on the status of the separations. Previously, we were just accepting separations from the agencies. They would go into EDI and they'd separate somebody, and we wouldn't necessarily find a discrepancy with that information until down the road. Say we get an allegation of misconduct and we're looking and the information doesn't quite match, or an allegation of misconduct indicates a person was separated, but EDI indicates the person is still employed. So in August, we actually changed our procedure for that to mirror that of the appointment process. So agencies now have to enter all the information in EDI as they had before, but rather than an immediate approval and separation shown in EDI, that gets forwarded to my team and we review the information. We don't necessarily tell the agency they're wrong or they can't do this, but we look at the data that they've entered into EDI as well as the affidavit of separation form itself and mark 43 to make sure all of the information aligns and that there's no discrepancies. If there are discrepancies, we kick it back to the agency and advise them of what the discrepancy is so that they can remedy that. We don't have to go through the process of doing the corrections because agencies can no longer correct that information on their own. It has to go through post for that correction after the fact. So just an update on that. And another big thing for us was we didn't always get a reason for separation. And by statute, we're supposed to. And so this then we're able to go back to the agency and say, hey, I know you marked resigned or retired, but you need to tell us, were they resigning in lieu, even if it's not serious misconduct? Were they retiring in good standing? We need to know that. And so we can provide more accurate information. So just some quick numbers up until that point of August 21st, 2024 is when we kind of flipped that switch. So from January to August 20th, we'd received 4,310 total affidavits of separation. Of those, we updated the form back in, I believe, April to capture more accurate information. People were still using 1,000, just over 1,000 agencies were still using, not agencies, 1,000 separations were still on the old form. So we weren't capturing the most accurate data. So again, this new process would help us ensure they're using the current form. We're referred to as box 14. That's the open text box where we're asking agencies to provide us with the specific reasons for separation. Again, they don't have to go into all the details, but just a summary. So we have a general idea. Just over 1,700 of those were left blank. And so had we been doing this process from the beginning, we would have had more reasoning for those 1,700 individuals. 19% of individuals resigned to move to a different agency, so they were resigning in good standing. And then 62% left in good standing as a whole. So people who were resigning to move to another agency, people who have retired, people who are just, I'm done with the profession. So the numbers aren't bad, but we're trying to gain accuracy, which is why we changed that process.
Michelle, if I may. Manny Alvarez again. So that affidavit of separation, the data obviously is very important for us internally to be accurate, but what you're also sharing the affidavit of separation with potential new hires or new departments where that individual goes to, is that correct?
Yes, sorry. That is also something new that we're doing when agencies are required to request the background, what we're referring to as the background letter from Post for any information we have on potential allegations of misconduct. We are also releasing copies of the affidavits of separation if we have them available to us. So people who have separated before we started collecting these, obviously we won't have them. But people who have separated within the last couple of years, we're also releasing this so that the potential hiring agency can see exactly what the separating agency has provided to us, level of transparency, and also a check and balance for that background process. You know, in the event that the prior agency didn't provide all the information to the background investigator, or perhaps the background investigator themselves did not collect or ask the right questions. So we're trying to cover all our bases, not only for us, but also for the potential employing agencies. So that's something that started in August as well.
Before you leave the slide, I can ask a point of clarification.
Mhm.
So it says 2,877 resigned. Does that
Yes.
mean they left the profession, or could they have gone to work for another agency and been included in the 6,496 appointments approved?
Right.
Okay, got it.
They could have resigned in good standing from the profession altogether, or they could have resigned from one agency to move to another agency, and then they would be recaptured in that appointment box. Yes. This supplements the data that Bureau Chief Radford provided to you earlier. Again, this is just for 2024, so the totals won't be exactly the same as what he provided to you as a total number. But so far this year, we've issued a total of 49 immediate temporary suspensions. Those are the ones that are issued at the executive director's discretion after review of allegations of misconduct. And then we've removed a number of temporary suspensions, 34 of them, and that I want to explain could be as a result of them appealing, saying, I have additional facts for you to consider. That could be a result of the local district attorney dismissing the charges. We no longer have that authority to have that suspension. It is also potentially related to the revocations, because temporary suspensions are supposed to stand until it's either rescinded by the executive director or it's replaced by a commission action, whether they say, no, we're not going to move forward with revocation, or we are moving forward with revocation. So any revocations that we would issue, any voluntary surrenders that may come as a result, that would lead to a temporary suspension having to be removed so that it could be replaced by the subsequent action. So this year we have so far received 55 voluntary surrenders. I will give a shout out to our Central Bureau. I know he's looking for this. Central Bureau earns the most voluntary surrenders. And then the number of revocations, again, as you can see, and then the 1029 ineligibilities that I think were well explained by Anne Marie. Again, these are for this calendar year. And then these are new statistics that will be showing to the commission for the first time this go around. They are not on our public facing page yet. I wanted to have the commission take a look and see if they wanted any changes. But now that we've had 2 years worth of data that we can collect, we have some demographic data to look at. And I think it's interesting. At least I think it's interesting. I hope the commission thinks it's interesting. I hope you think it's interesting to be able to see the breakdown, the age distribution and the number of years of service. I find to be the most interesting, and perhaps telling that maybe there's something more that we could do as a preventive measure with the agencies, either at post level training, or agencies can take this information and perhaps do something. I don't know if you're aware, but we are making some additions to the academy training to address SB2 and the serious misconduct, to kind of put them on notice, be on the lookout from the start of your career. And then because it's harder to see, I've broken down each of these so they're bigger. And that's all I have. If you have any additional questions, I'm available.
Questions or comments from the committee? Ms. Cottrell.
Would it be possible to see how that demographic breakdown correlates with the actual demographics of working peace officers in the state?
Yeah, we could. We do have that information available right now on our public facing site. So we could potentially in the future do kind of not necessarily an overlay because it would get even harder to see, but maybe a side-by-side comparison.
Okay, that, thank you.
Any questions, comments on this item? I think I do agree that years of service data is pretty interesting. I appreciate having that information. It's good to see. And maybe there is more that we can do at the beginning of a career to try and help address that, because obviously that chart was pretty stacked on the front end. So, yeah. Okay, any other questions? Thank you very much for that presentation. So our lunch won't be ready till about 12:30. I'll check in with we can take a break, yes. So how about we take, what time is it? It's 11:50. How about we start again at 12 o'clock and we'll take on another item before our lunch break?
They might getting annoyed at me because I was asking too many questions.
Okay, I'm going to call this meeting back to order again very briefly, but we are going to break for lunch now. The food is ready. This next item might take a few minutes. So we're going to go ahead and break for lunch. We'll come back here at 12:30 and pick up on the agenda after that. So at this point, we'll recess to lunch. See you back here at 12:30 and we'll get back to business. Thank you.
5:30.
Hey, welcome back from lunch, and we will call this meeting back to order and move on with our presentations. We still have a number of them to go, but our next item is going to be a presentation on consent item 2H, which is going to be report on discussion regarding gaps in commission regulations 1205 and potential changes to the dishonesty provision. This time I call upon Chief Counsel William Toby Darden, Legal Affairs Bureau, and Assistant Director Anne-Marie Del Manayo in the Executive Office, who will provide a report on this item.
Okay, good afternoon. The first presentation after lunch, so I'm going to try to keep you awake with inflections or whatever need be. I've asked Anne-Marie to be up as well because she's really our policy person when it comes to state licensing issues, with her tremendous expertise in dealing with licensing issues in California. So at the meeting in September, the commission meeting in September, some issues were raised and there was an ongoing discussion about whether or not, now that we have 2 years under our belt of SB2, whether or not there were instances that we had identified or that state police chiefs and sheriffs could identify about potential gaps in our existing serious misconduct regulation. In other words, instances of misconduct, which most folks might think, hey, that person should be decertified, but the conduct did not fit within our existing regulatory definition. And so the question that came before the commission in September was, what are those issues? And are there any possible instances where we might want to look at our existing regulation on misconduct and tweak it to potentially add additional categories that could capture misconduct that is not currently found in regulation? And I haven't level set with this body, and you're probably aware of this, but let me just say at a very high level. So the legislature said in Senate Bill 2 that we at Post could define serious misconduct, but in that definition, we were required at minimum to include the very specific categories that the legislature had enumerated. Those are the 9 specific named categories. So the legislature said in our definition of misconduct, which we are given the ability to do, we can define it, but at minimum, those have to be included. So that is a floor. At minimum, those have to be included, and we cannot do anything to detract from that. But we can add additional categories or flesh out additional categories within the existing definitions. Largely in the definition that we currently have in a regulation, we have stuck for the most part with the statutory requirements in Senate Bill 2, but there are some instances where we have fleshed it out a bit. So at this meeting, there were several categories that questions were raised about. One of them was dishonesty. There was a question raised also about the physical abuse requirement, which includes excessive and unreasonable force and whether or not we could change that physical abuse. And then another question was raised about the provision in Senate Bill 2, which says that decertification can be based upon a law enforcement officer's discharge for serious misconduct, separate and apart from the category of whether or not the commission can prove that the officer engaged in serious misconduct. These are all questions which would require extensive discussion, and we'd be here for a day if we tried to cover all of them. So we're taking them in pieces. This first piece really gets to the question of dishonesty. As to dishonesty, there were concerns that were raised by some law enforcement officers, and certainly we've seen them as well, that there are instances of dishonesty which do not currently fit within the existing regulatory definition. So if you look at the regulatory definition, and can we go ahead and put up option 1? If you look at the existing regulatory definition, those categories are limited to dishonesty in the context of a criminal investigation or dishonesty in an investigation of police misconduct. What you're seeing on the screen off to the left is the existing text, and over to the right is an option that I've presented for us to look at today. We have 2 options. But as you'll see over on the left, this is really the statutory definition: dishonesty relating to reporting, investigation, or prosecution of a crime, or relating to the reporting of or investigation of misconduct by a peace officer or custodial officer. Those are the 2 narrow categories that currently dishonesty is encompassed with by regulation. So some examples were raised at the commission meeting. For instance, you have an officer that's dishonest about work-related conduct that is not an investigation of a crime. An example was given of an officer that got involved in an accident and gave a false, or alleged to have given a false explanation or reason for how that accident occurred. Or you could have dishonesty in the context of other reporting by a law enforcement officer to his employer. So for example, work-related reporting or conduct that's not directly related to a crime or an investigation of police misconduct, such as timesheet fraud or why you called in sick or whether or not you checked the backseat of the police car or whatever. But if it's not directly related to investigation, reporting, or prosecution of a crime, or not directly related to an investigation of peace officer misconduct, it's not currently actionable. So the question was, should we, can we? And the answer is yes, we can. The next question is, should we? And this is the question for discussion today. Should we expand the existing categories beyond the definition over on the left? And as you'll see, we have done one thing in the existing regulation. It's down at the bottom of the current provision 1205, where we did explain that for purposes of determining whether or not, if there's serious misconduct, whether or not we should suspend or revoke which of those alternatives, then we have provided some additional detail about, we would look to whether it related to a material or significant fact in the context of the statement or omission, and whether it appears to have been done willfully, et cetera. So we have added that, but largely, again, we're limited to those 2 categories currently on dishonesty. So what I did in the staff report is I took a look at some of the questions about what is dishonesty. There are questions about is an omission dishonesty, is reckless disregard dishonesty, and so forth. So we took a look at that, and we could decide to further define dishonesty as one possibility. And then, of course, what we could do is potentially expand the existing categories to take into account additional examples of dishonesty beyond those which are currently found in regulation. Currently, dishonesty is sort of generally in the law and also as set forth in our statute. It includes both dishonest statements and dishonest acts. But it does normally, it's understood to imply an intentional misstatement or omission and not a statement made based upon our mistake or misunderstanding. But in any event, we have not defined it in our regulation beyond the listing of the particular examples which the legislature had provided to us. So these options are not, we're not asking for any of these options to be adopted. They really are, it's a thought process, so that you could see as we look to some additional states, and I gave it some thought, about how we could potentially change or amend the statute to take some of these things into account. It may be that the advisory and the commission wants to do some of it, wants to do none of it, wants to do all of it. We don't know, but it's just for discussion. What do you think is kind of what we're looking at. So let me just take you very quickly through the options. In both options, I included what I refer to as a preface, and that's that first paragraph. Now, just so for the advisory committee, if you weren't around when we had the discussions initially on Senate Bill 2, we had a number of questions as to whether or not we should have an overarching definition of dishonesty, a definition above and beyond the 9, but which was perhaps more generic or provided additional detail as to when we might be able to decertify an officer. And the determination at that time was not to have an overarching definition. That would be something like, making it up on the fly here, an officer that engages in an act which would tend to make the public believe that the officer can't be trustworthy, or that would show that the officer is not fit, something along those lines. That's not what this is. This is what I call a preface. And the reason that I thought it was important to put it in is, number one, with this preface, I believe that it is largely just declaratory of what already exists in Senate Bill 2. So I don't believe that we're adding really much of anything in the preface, but it does make clear what I think is the important concept that we have here, and that is when we, the commission, are determining whether or not we're going to decertify a peace officer, we're looking at the question not of, gee, is an employment action appropriate? So employers obviously can look at conduct and say, we don't want this person working for us. We are looking at, as the commission, we're looking at the broader issue of whether or not this conduct means that this person should no longer be operating as a peace officer statewide. So there is a difference analytically between conduct which might be justification for local action, for an employment action, but that it may not necessarily rise to the level of decertification. So in the preface, I simply tried to state that and say that dishonesty is that which we have set forth in our regulation and is set forth by statute, which warrants suspension or revocation of the peace officer certification, and that we would consider the health, welfare, or safety of the public in making that determination. And also just to keep in mind that what we're looking at here is the question of whether or not this conduct warrants the person's removal from the profession, not necessarily just separation from a particular job. So again, this is just a preface. These are just ideas. I'd love to have your thoughts as to what you think. Now, in terms of expanding dishonesty beyond those 2 categories that are stated over on the left, so this is one approach, and this is what I found in at least one state where the legislature in that state looks to dishonesty in the practice of law enforcement. This is not uncommon, as I think Anne Marie would be able to tell you, in licensing schemes where you'll have the practice of law, the practice of architecture, the practice of medicine, the practice of nursing, et cetera. And so it's not uncommon in a licensing context to have that as a category. If we did that, though, we would have to define it. And so in this case, I've tried to do that by talking about what the practice of law enforcement would be. And in this case, actions or statements made by the peace officer while engaged in the performance of their law enforcement duties, including upholding and enforcing the law and so forth. So that would be the definition of the practice of law enforcement, or something like it. And then in this one, I also made some attempt to define dishonesty: knowingly, willfully, intentionally, or without a legitimate law enforcement purpose, making false, misleading, deceptive, untrue, et cetera, fraudulent misrepresentations, et cetera. So these are just ideas. So one option would be changing it from the 2 categories to having the preface broadly defining the practice of law enforcement, and that any dishonesty in the practice of law enforcement, and then some attempt to define it. Then can we go to option 2? Then the other potential approach is a little bit more limited. Okay. And so in this approach, we did it, I did it a little bit more limited again, only to give us an idea about some thoughts and options. And once again, this is only for discussion purposes. So in this one, I left the preface in, And then just laid out a little bit more specifically. Currently, the reporting, investigation, or prosecution of a crime, that's the existing provision. The next provision in the current statute is just the investigation of misconduct by a peace officer. And so this would broaden that out to say dishonesty in the reporting or investigation of any criminal or internal matter in which an officer is a subject, witness, or involved party, including an investigation of misconduct. So this would broaden it out to basically any IA or any investigation conducted by the law enforcement employer. Obviously, that could be broad. That could include an internal affairs investigation on an EEO matter or something along those lines, or an investigation into something which was really de minimis conduct. But again, the question is whether or not the commission would like to define it to broaden it out beyond the existing investigation of a crime or only in the investigation of misconduct by a law enforcement officer. And then the final potential category I had here is dishonesty in the officer's performance of law enforcement duties. That also would require some fleshing out, because when you think about it, the question is, are you talking about core duties of policing? Are you talking about other duties which may be more internal or administrative in terms of, but again, as you get closer to that, you're more likely looking at, and I say this without judgment, you're more likely looking at issues which are really within the employer's determination to make, but don't necessarily rise to the level of decertification. Anne Marie, do you have some thoughts you'd like to raise on it? Sorry, I'm just sort of throwing it to Anne Marie.
That's okay. Probably super confusing. I think primarily where we have some, administrative concerns is the definition is pretty narrow within the statute. And I think there was some intent behind that to really focus on those acts of dishonesty that have that direct public safety impact. Just for context, without the definition being broadened, we've already had over 700 complaints that we've closed as not clear and convincing evidence or does not meet the definition of serious misconduct. And 268, I believe, of those were sustained by the agency. So had we broadened this definition, there's a whole additional bucket of cases that would then fall under post jurisdiction. As we talked about earlier, we have over 32,000 reports, 10,000 sitting in abeyance right now. So if you think about post trying to wrap its arms around broadening the definition of serious misconduct, I think my fear is that we would be then looking at some of these dishonest acts. And while very important and critical to the agency in making an employment decision, maybe do not have that direct public safety aspect to them that we're really trying to focus on from a licensing level. So I just wanted to provide you some context. The other thing I think that is important for us to keep in mind is when we talk about a material fact that has been either intentionally omitted or there's been willful dishonesty or willful misconduct, those things usually flesh themselves out in these cases. As soon as you start broadening this into things like timesheet fraud or failure to report the use of a patrol vehicle off duty, something of that nature, it's very difficult for post then to gather all of those facts and make a case that this, in fact, as Toby mentioned, is something that should remove the peace officer from the profession indefinitely. This is the only profession in the state of California where once you are revoked or removed, there is no reinstatement proceedings for you. So when you start broadening this definition into things that perhaps are less public safety oriented, you're talking about removing someone from their chosen profession for the rest of their career. And then if reported to NDI, the National Decertification Index, they wouldn't be able to work as a peace officer anywhere in the country potentially. So we just need to take a look at the significance of this. One, can we administratively handle receiving might be thousands of complaints? Right now we don't have this definition, so it's hard to say. And then also, is this where a government body belongs into the employment sector? So just things for the folks to think about. Questions?
Brent Stalker. I'm just trying to understand how many complaints are the complaints that you're talking about right now, is that solely on dishonesty?
Oh, there's far more than that. What we looked at is the dishonesty complaints that were closed, specifically because they don't meet the current definition of dishonesty, because it's so narrow right now in the statute. These 700 complaints that I'm referring to are beyond the definition as we have it today. And we're already getting those reports from law enforcement agencies because they don't understand the tightly knitted definition. And so they are submitting to us complaints of dishonesty that perhaps don't fall into this limited, narrow scope. So if we were to broaden that, that number would grow exponentially. The closed factors of those cases are not clear and convincing evidence and does not meet the definition of serious misconduct. So that was just a sampling of looking at some of those cases.
Okay.
Some of those cases.
I appreciate that. It's just, I mean, for me, when I hear the word dishonesty in law enforcement, that's very bothersome to me because that is something that, you know, my whole career I've heard that. And so I always preach that. So it's important to me, you know, obviously that there is a clear definition on that. But I also, maybe I'm overthinking this, but I don't know. To me, dishonesty isn't that hard. It's just you're either honest or you're not. And so I think diving into it too much, I think complicates things. And maybe I'm off base on that, but I just think I certainly personally don't have a, you know, if somebody says, yeah, somebody's dishonest, I mean, that's pretty clear cut and easy for me, but it doesn't sound like that's the case for everybody, if I'm correct on that.
Yes, I believe so. Thank you for your comments.
Sheriff O'Day. Sure. So Anne Marie, I think your position was well stated, and I think those are some significant considerations that need to be taken into account. Going back to the language as it currently exists, can we put that back up on the board? Is that possible? Because I actually view the portion of the current regulation where it says, or investigation of misconduct by a peace officer or custodial officer, including but not limited to false statements, intentionally filing false reports, tampering with falsifying, destroying, or concealing evidence, perjury, tampering with data recorded by body-worn camera or other recording devices for the purpose of concealing misconduct, to be fairly broad. I think within that definition, you can look at a lot of conduct that would be considered misconduct that doesn't necessarily relate to a criminal investigation. Now, I agree with you. I'm not necessarily sure that Post should be in the business of decertifying somebody because of perhaps time card discrepancies. And I appreciate the point that on its face, honesty versus dishonesty seems like a simple thing, but having litigated that issue significantly in a lot of different realms, I can tell you that it isn't often easy to determine whether or not a person made a material statement or omission of a statement with the intent to deceive, because there's all kinds of defenses that could be proffered that would take it out of the realm of dishonesty. It doesn't necessarily mean that the agency can't deal with them, because we can still fire them for misconduct that maybe you don't necessarily believe falls within the definition of this. And I would submit to you that if we fire somebody for example, time card fraud, it's unlikely that they're going to get a job if a background is done by another law enforcement agency. But I'm concerned about so broadening the scope of this that you start to tread upon the purview of the employing agency, one, and two, it's certainly not lost on me. And that's one of the reasons I asked the question earlier is what's the backlog? 10,000 cases. And I noted that the highest number of decertifications surround dishonesty based on the definition that you currently have. It doesn't appear to me that Post currently has the resources to deal with all of the cases that you currently have. And so to broaden that and put an additional burden on Post, given the resources that are available, I think is challenging. And I would come back to my original statement that misconduct, investigation of misconduct includes a whole bunch of conduct that may not be related specifically to a criminal investigation. Interestingly enough, I read the transcript from last time. I wasn't here, wasn't present, but I spoke with Sheriff Taylor this morning about the instance that he spoke about and brought forward. And in my view, the conduct described there could certainly be considered misconduct that was being investigated, notwithstanding the fact that it wasn't a criminal investigation. So I guess I would say my recommendation is to tread cautiously at best in terms of modifying this, because I think you have a lot to work with under the current statutory language.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Sheriff, any additional questions or comments from the committee? I'll just add, I did testify at the last post-commission meeting on this issue. One of the cases was one of mine, and I still feel pretty strongly about that one. But I also understand, I think the context that you provided is certainly helpful, because I agree with the sheriff, you know, it's a heavy lift for post, potentially, if you do broaden the definition. As I mentioned in the situation that I testified about my experience, I do not think the officer should be in the profession, but he's no longer employed, at least. But I don't have a good alternative definition, because I also agree that I don't know that we want to get into time card type issues and some of those issues related to dishonesty, and certainly that would overwhelm posts, and we would not be able to complete the mission that SB2 was intended to do. So with that, I don't have a great definition. I think there are some options here, although I agree, I think to some degree, in some instances, it does fit under the misconduct. And maybe looking at misconduct in the existing definition a little broader in terms of maybe it's not in an IA just yet, but there is still misconduct that is being investigated. So with that, any additional questions or comments? Okay. Thank you for that report. Okay, our next item is going to be consent item 2I, report on peace officer education requirements, AB 89. At this time, I call upon legislative liaison Megan Paulus from the Office of Public Affairs and the Executive Office, who will provide a report on this item.
Good afternoon. My name is Megan Polis. For those of you who do not know me, I am the legislative liaison here at Post. AB 89 is the legislation that just doesn't, it's the gift that keeps on giving for me, as I know it is for all of you. So hoping to have at least a discussion today with the intent to bring forward ideas to continue to address this topic as we move forward into the next legislative session. So I'm going to give a brief history, even though I'm fairly certain most of you are very familiar with this legislation. But I do think it's important because as the last few years have gone on, there's been a lot of confusion and kind of consternation around the legislation. So AB 89 was passed into law in September of 2021. And since then, as I just stated, there's been a lot of confusion and conversation around the language that was added to the statute. AB 89 gave direction to the California community colleges to develop a report of recommendations on peace officer education requirements to the legislature and for Post to adopt those recommendations within 2 years of the submission of that report. The report was completed and submitted to the legislature by the colleges in October of last year, so 2023. So that essentially starts the time clock for Post to then adopt those recommendations by the fall of 2025. So we have about a year. So AB 89 outlined very specific recommendations that the report include, along with the requirement of both the modern policing degree program and a bachelor's degree in the discipline of their choosing as minimum education requirements for employment as a police officer, as a peace officer. I would really like to emphasize that word "and." The intent was "or." But unfortunately, intent doesn't go very long when the statute says "and." The report from the community colleges did not provide clarification, but it did state that the degree should be obtained prior to receiving a basic certificate or within 24 months of initial appointment. Since the enactment of AB 89 in 2021, there have been multiple attempts to codify the intent and the requirements into a more palpable objective. including the correction of either degree to meet the necessary requirements from an and to an or, and to establish when the degree needs to be obtained by. Unfortunately, there has not been success yet in codifying that statute. So as I said, attempts will continue in 2025, and the legislative session begins next month. So where does that lead our discussion today? Knowing that there are proposals forthcoming in the next legislative session, what does the commission and this committee wish to see in those proposals? How can Post best implement such a requirement, and what do we need to be considering? Keep in mind that Post does not develop the degree content, but rather how do we implement the requirements of future officers meeting those education requirements?
Okay, thank you for that report, and I will ask the committee if there are any questions or comments on this one. Ms. Morrell.
Tammy Morrell from California Academy Directors Association. I will kick this off. The and/or is huge. Of course, you know that. We've had this discussion for years, as you said. My question is, as everything stands right now, if nothing changes, when does this legislation take effect? I've lost track of when a police officer is going to have a modern policing degree, and as it stands right now, and a bachelor's degree in order to get a basic post certificate. I've lost track of the timeline.
So that part still is very confusing because the way that the law reads, all it states is that Post must adopt the recommendations in the report. That's all it says by essentially fall of 2025. So it doesn't say that they have to have that. It just simply states the colleges need to create this report. The recommendations from that report need to be adopted by Post within 2 years of the report being released.
So with Post not being an educational entity, how is Post going to adopt something that they have no control over?
That's part of the discussion today.
Okay.
Fine. May I, Mr. Chair? So AB 89 didn't change Government Code Section 1031, which contains the minimum education requirements, which currently state a high school diploma or GED. So really, from our standpoint in our discussion internally was, hey, we need to put this before the commission kind of sooner rather than later, because they're going to have to make a decision by October as to what they're going to want to adopt. And the term adopt, various people have different, they define that word differently, but it leaves it seems like it leaves discretion to the commission as to what they want to accept. One option is simply, hey, sit tight, because there will potentially be, and I would say potentially likely be, legislation that's going to modify AB 89, but we need to put this on their radar sooner rather than later. I mean, we've had numerous discussions before the commission on AB 89, but we don't want to wait till the last minute and take some direction from them. So that's why you're seeing it today as a consent item. Obviously, for the law enforcement community, you can't go to any meeting without this AB 89 coming up as a topic of discussion.
Sheriff Honey.
You're going to regret having me on this committee, I think. I have
Not
too
at
many
all.
questions. So Manny, picking up on what you said, if I understand correctly, AB 89 did not change the minimum requirements to be a peace officer, which is a high school diploma currently.
Megan, correct me if I'm wrong. It did not change Government Code Section 1031. Usually when you see legislation, it'll say, this is what's being changed.
So, but requires Post to adopt it. And so do I understand correctly that the conflict in law that would exist, if your interpretation is correct, is this? You could still hire a person to be a peace officer with a high school diploma, but they wouldn't be eligible for a basic post certificate until they met the requirements of AB 89. Is that the conflict that exists?
A little bit. I think just knowing that going forward, there is the intention of changing the government code.
Understand that completely. Okay, fair enough. But yes, but there's also an intention, because I was part of the negotiation with this when it was coming through, and we were very clear that it was an or. not an and. And so I think that that's where we need to go there. I just want to understand the distinction that you were making. This is untenable. We don't have enough candidates as it is. If you put a requirement, as you all know, that a person have, in addition to this modern policing degree, a bachelor's degree, we would be unable to recruit enough qualified candidates. And it's not lost on me the fact that about 3,000 people are retiring every year, and you're only appointing about 3,000 people. So you're barely keeping up with the number of people that are leaving the profession versus the people that are coming in. I know where I'm at. I have 107 open positions in my organization, and trying to recruit those people would be extremely difficult. So I think we need to sit tight, and my recommendation would be to sit tight until the legislation is corrected so that we have an actual fighting chance of recruiting people. And I know that the modern policing degree is still a little bit unsettled. I have some issues with that, especially as it relates to not all of the units that are awarded through the regular basic academy at a community college count towards the modern policing degree. And I beg the question that if we're not teaching modern policing in the academy, then what are we teaching, and why aren't all those units applicable? But that's perhaps a topic for another day. But I don't think that we should adopt, or I wouldn't think that the commission should adopt a plan that materially is flawed, not only in terms of what the intent of the law was, but in terms of what it will do to our ability to recruit qualified people. Thank you.
Mr. Urban.
I'm not the most knowledgeable person on this subject. How many units are required to get the modern policing degree?
The degree hasn't been established yet. The colleges are still working on that.
What's theoretically you could create as much as having to have 2 bachelor's degrees to satisfy this requirement?
I don't believe that's the intent. That seems to be the word of the day.
So if
In
we-
theory, no.
I agree with what you're saying, to take any type of action without really knowing what the consequences are, the end result. I just don't understand how to make an informed decision if we don't even know what the topic.
The discussion was always that the modern policing degree would be equivalent to an AA with 60 units. Yeah.
That was to incorporate, to then complete in the second half to get the BA. But if it's, right, it was supposed to be the first 60 and then you can get a bachelor's, but now you have to have both?
Yeah, the intent was the modern policing degree, which we always took to be 60 units, essentially equivalent to an AA. And then they put or a bachelor's degree would do that. Then they put which leaves us in the position where you've got to get this modern police degree, which is this, we don't know what this is, and a bachelor's degree, which would be.
And I've agreed every time I've heard you say this, what's going on in the academy if that's not modern policing that's being taught? I would be concerned then maybe it's just the academy curriculum that needs to be revamped.
Can we ask you to talk into the microphone so that the people that aren't in the room? can
Sorry
hear?
about that.
Thank you.
I'm new here. I just.
So if I may, Mr. Chair, so myself and another bureau chief from Post sat on the community college task force to build out, not to build out the curriculum for the modern policing degree, but to make the recommendations to the legislature. The community colleges did what they could with AB 89. It was a challenge for everybody that participated in that. So my understanding of the curriculum was that it was not going to be a total of 60 units. I heard 58 units, and perhaps you can 55 units as opposed to 60. Part of the other challenges is that AB 89 also articulates that it has to be transferable basically for a bachelor's degree, which adds complexity for the colleges to build that curriculum. And then as part of the regular basic course that they would get 25, I believe, 25 or so units for completion of the academy towards the modern policing degree. Again, not advocating for one or the other, just to add some data to the question you posed. And there was legislation last year that I'm sure many of you are aware that kind of changed this significantly, that got rid of the word and to or, that basically
Expanded the
pushed
timeline.
pushed it to 2029. Obviously, even if the student can take the modern policing degree today, how are they gonna, get it completed within the narrow time frame that is called for? The legislation did not move forward simply because of some not even grammatical issues, but there were some words that were taken out, some commas and some ands that changed the whole legislation. I think the author of the Megan would, I'll speak to this, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the author of the legislation, the law enforcement associations, the community colleges, everybody seemed to be in favor of the changes in the legislation last year, but it died just based on the commas and the ands. So we have been saying, and including at the Academy consortiums, as Member Morell could testify to, is we always said, hey, this is going to change. It's going to change. And obviously it didn't change, but we're still confident that there's probably going to be some legislation this session to clean it up. But we should all be aware of it because the timeline is quickly approaching for the commission.
Good.
Chair Cottrell, just to echo the sentiments that we're hearing here, I understand that the crosswalks for equivalency haven't quite been established, but if we could look at what learning domains we have in play now, that would meet the equivalency needs of this modern policing degree. We have the new learning domain and wellness in our basic academies now. Would that not meet some of those emotional intelligence requirements of the modern policing degree? So if we can start marrying up the things that we already have in our basic academy and then figure out what portions are not being met that we need to flesh out a bit, adding 4, 8, 12 weeks to our basic academy and meeting the needs of the modern policing degree may be the win-win that we're looking for, as opposed to having that be these two separate sections that they have to complete. I think that the academy is challenging enough for folks to get themselves through without having to worry about night school and all these other things. We want to make this something that we're bringing people into this profession for the long term, not making it so difficult to get into this workforce that we're going to lose folks on the front end.
Mr. Cordova.
Yes, sir. Anthony Cordova, California Community College Chancellor's Office. Not to disagree with anybody and contradict anything, but just to share a little bit more clarity from what I've been abreast of. More specifically around the model curriculum itself, the Academic Senate for the California Community Colleges have completed the modern policing degree and have submitted that available, and you can probably find it on the website for the Academic Senate itself. And there has been that task force that Manny referenced earlier, and just sharing with some of the content that I have in front of me. It is a total of a minimum of 45 units with an option up to 55 with some of the available elective units. There is what they call CID, it's course identification. Those have been identified as available articulated classes that can transfer for transferability. It's one of the university designators that they have. So they do have those already completely identified, along with a general education pattern and breadth that would be allowable to complete the program itself. And that includes like your communications, English classes, et cetera. And then there's options for different types of math and art classes in there for a total of 45, as I said, and then the Cal GETSI is equivalent for 34 units, which then there's some double counted and a total of 55. For the associate degree, you do need to get 60 units. So you'll have to be able to take additional elective units that would be included into the degree, and it's really going to be at the student's discretion of what those units can be. I don't know the emotional side of it from, what the course's content actually means and how it correlates to other training components of it. And then the other aspect of it is we have in the community college system, I do know of at least one baccalaureate program that has been approved for modern policing within the California community colleges, and I know another one that is still pending the intersegmental discussions with the UC systems itself. So they're looking at building that out to be able to provide the resources when we do get to that point. So that way the student, if it does stay with the or the and component of it, at least the system will be set up for success and we'll be able to provide the training to meet that degree requirement.
Thank you. Ms. Morell.
I think part of the challenge when we start talking about credit for prior learning, is that the requirements of this degree are so narrow. Like art in the Western world simply is not taught in the police academy. So there's a lot of areas that are required in the legislation that we do not cover in the police academy. I'm pretty intimately familiar with that curriculum. And to me, the intent of the modern policing degree was to add the humanities side in, which really the police academy is technical. And so the basic education, the GETSI stuff is not covered in a police academy. For our, I'm looking at our degree proposal that's now going through the process. And even though our police academy is in excess of 40 units, only about 7 of them can apply in their electives. So we can take the electives that the legislature did not specify, and those can be police academy units. Everything else is very, very specific. And so, like for example, math, they are making statistics, which to me equates to crime analysis, a class that's available in lieu of math, but we don't teach that in the basic course. And so the challenge is, while the basic course is very modern, the legislature specifically, in my mind, the way I read it, I'm only speaking from personal experience, said the way the police academy is being taught isn't enough. We want something different. And that's what we got, something very different from the police academy in the degree requirements.
Miguel
Jacob.
Pacheco with CPOA, and pardon my ignorance on this, but any of the initial discussions been going on for several years now, dealing with our veterans or folks coming out of the military with all the education and what that looks like?
Yeah, there is a component in AB 89 that does state that that has to be considered. That has not been fleshed out. I do know that there is intention to discuss that.
So with that and all the other issues, I couldn't agree more that I would advise Post not to take a stance on this and kick the proverbial can as far as they can down the road. That's just one item that if it hasn't been fleshed out, then how can we make a decision on it? We've hired many agencies, many veterans with a lot of schooling and a lot more life experience. So to hear that it's at least on the radar, I think is a good thing. But if there's no traction with that, that's more than a little concerning. We have people coming in from the military with essentially associates and a lot of work experience. So I would hope that the commission would be pushing that to be part of the discussion kind of on the front end.
Scrito.
To address the military, as a veteran myself, I completely took advantage of the units that I was afforded to be able to increase my education attainment at a little bit more rapid rate. So I've always been an advocate and supporter of what we talk about, the military articulation program. Throughout the California community college system, we're actually elevating that. It's the credit for prior learning. I believe we're probably about 70% of our colleges across the state have adopted 100% of the colleges have adopted the process and policy. They're now adopting the means to be able to articulate those units that for evaluation purposes. I believe about 70% of the colleges have a full-on program set up for veterans itself. We're expanding that to the portfolio and the industry recognized credentials as well to increase that. So, I mean, from a budget perspective in this year, there's a lot of emphasis that's put into the credit for prior learning process itself and expanding that throughout the state of California. And veterans in policing specifically, I think is one of those low-hanging fruits and easy wins for us to evaluate.
Mr. Tucker.
A quick question for you and probably the rest of my colleagues on this. If I'm understanding this correctly, you have, let's just say that a police officer gets hired and just has a high school diploma, gets hired. If I'm understanding this correctly, in that instance, they would have 24 months to complete this education in order to get their basic post certificate. Is
Right
that,
now?
yes.
No, there's no requirement at all.
Okay, so sorry, I was reading.
They would just need their high school diploma.
Okay, if they get hired, so there's going to be no requirement for educational for somebody that's already been hired.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
At some point there will be. but not
Eventually.
that it's taken effect today, yes.
Correct. That is the intent. Eventually, there will be something in government code that will specify when and how and what.
Those individuals are I'm sorry, I apologize, ma'am, Mr. Chair, Manny Alvarez. Those individuals are grandfathered in. Every peace officer is grandfathered in. Correct.
Obviously, there are a lot of, Salazar, obviously, there are a lot of moving parts still yet to be determined with regards to AB 89 that haven't been ironed out, whether it's academy credits, the timeline for what it is, the and/or piece, which I think I'm confident that that piece will be worked out. But I also think, as to Ms. Morell's points, the specificity of some of the requirements in the degree, I think really, although I think some of them are important, are also problematic. I think there needs to be the legislation needs to be fixed to some degree to allow a broader pathway to obtain this education. Maybe it's incorporates other AA degrees aside from just an MPD. Obviously, the bachelor's degree, what can we account the academy towards? And I think that was good insight, though, that you also provided as to what Ms. Morell, as to what the academy would transfer over, which was, I didn't know. So that's good information. But I think there's a lot that still needs to be done. It would, and our recommendation or my recommendation to the commission would be not to accept a report at this time because there's still too many variables that need to be worked out. Primarily, I think in the legislation, and I know a number of groups are working to do that. So whether it's, again, the military, the academy piece, and really there should be a broader pathway to obtaining this education requirement aside from just an MPD and a bachelor's degree in my perspective, that need to be considered. So any additional questions or comments on this item? Okay. Court? You're up on the next one too. So next is consent item 2J, report on the legislative update. And again, we will hear from Megan Pullis.
Okay, so since there's so many new committee members, I thought it would be good to just kind of give an overall what Post's role is when it comes to legislation. So Post as a state agency cannot oppose or support legislation. Not to say that we don't have a seat at the table. Our role is to primarily provide technical support, some advice, how would things be implemented. And my role at Post is really to safeguard the work we do here at Post, how it affects the field. So a lot of the conversations I have with the legislature is mostly about that. How would that work? How could that be implemented? How could it not be implemented? But we do not weigh in on any position. So obviously the session ended the end of September. So today my presentation will be fairly quick. I'm just going to go over bills that were signed or vetoed and how they would affect Post. So obviously it's not a complete list, and I know many of you belong to various associations that follow different types of legislation. So I'm happy to answer any questions about anything at the end. So the first bill that was signed into law was AB 2020. So this bill would mandate that Post create guidelines for law enforcement interactions with survivors of human trafficking by June 1st of 2026. It also mandates that law enforcement agencies create a policy based on those guidelines by December 1 of 2026. And that bill, as I stated, was signed. Go to the next slide. Sorry, the clicker's not working. Thank you. AB 2541, this bill requires Post to develop guidelines addressing wandering associated with Alzheimer's disease, autism, dementia, etc. The bill includes a minimum content such as protocols for deploying agency resources, developing community awareness and coordination and communication protocols between agencies, amongst others. And that was also signed by the governor. AB 2621, this bill requires Post to update the current Post hate crimes guidelines or model policy and training to include identifying when a gun violence restraining order is appropriate to prevent a hate crime and the procedures for seeking the gun violence restraining order. It additionally requires instruction on responses to hate crime waves against specified groups, including the LGBTQ and Jewish communities. And it also has further revisions to hate crime policy requirements, and that was also signed by the governor. The next bill is Senate Bill 989. So this bill requires Post to add procedures and techniques to its domestic violence guidelines in relation to deaths related to domestic violence. It also requires Post to update the mandated domestic violence refresher course with those topics outlined in the bill, and that bill was signed as well. So the last two bills I'm going to discuss were vetoed. So AB 2138, this bill would have established a pilot program for tribal police to have peace officer authority in California. That bill was vetoed. And then the next bill was Senate Bill 1020. This bill would have required each law enforcement agency and academy to prohibit the use of ethnic shooting targets, and that bill was vetoed as well. So the legislature reconvenes early next month. They reconvene early in December because it was an election year, so they have to swear in all the new members, but they won't really get too started until January 1. And then they have until almost the end of February to introduce new legislation. So when I see you all again in March, I think, I will have a lot to talk about. So stay tuned. I do anticipate that we're going to see a return of some sort of canine legislation. And obviously, as we just talked about, AB 89 and the education requirements, that there will be another attempt to codify those requirements as well. So stay tuned. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Our chair just stepped out for a little bit. I just open it up for any questions. None. Thank you for your presentation. And since our chair stepped out, at this point, I'd like to call for a 10-minute break. And let's be back at 1:40.
Back to order.
that's fun.
We're going to move on to the Basic Training Bureau. Item 4A is a report on changes to Commission Regulation 1018, Commission Procedure D15, and Public Safety Dispatchers Basic Course Training Specs. Staff Services Manager Jennifer Hardesty Imlay, Basic Training Bureau, will provide a report on this item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, committee members. At the June 8th, 2023 Commission meeting, proposed changes to the training specifications for the Public Safety Dispatchers Basic Course were presented and approved. However, the rulemaking process for the proposed changes was not started until May 2024. During the process to finalize the documentation, staff discovered there were 3 items that were previously approved by the Commission but needed to be addressed. The first item is Learning Domain 106, Domestic Violence, Section 2F, related to victims' rights. The training specifications mention Government Code Section 6204F, right to confidentiality. A review of that section revealed the referenced subsection does not exist, nor does the section include information related to victims of domestic violence. We reached out to presenters of the course to see how they were currently presenting that material, just to try to identify what the appropriate section would be. And we were told that they were either just mentioning that section, they were not covering it, or they were just kind of glossing over it and not really addressing it at all. So to address that, we decided to remove that for the public comment period while we do further research and identify the appropriate sections, at which time we will bring it back to the Commission for inclusion once we have that information. The second item is Learning Domain 114 under the Mental Health Conditions and Intellectual Developmental Disabilities Awareness domain, Section 2C, related to other conditions. The training specification referenced the term excited delirium. Assembly Bill 360 added Chapter 3.5 excited delirium to the Health and Safety Code and prohibits use of that term effective January 1, 2024. As a result of the delayed initiation of that rulemaking process, it allowed us to remove that term from the training specifications. The third item is related to Commission Procedure D15, which deleted a reference to the reporting requirements after the completion of the course. The content to the presented to the Commission for deletion was because of an incorrect subsection reference. So rather than deleting that information, we felt it was better to just correct the subsection. So that was the change that we're proposing. As the changes were initially approved by Commission, we had to bring it back at the request of the Office of Administrative Law for the Commission's approval to move forward with what we removed and what we changed to the language after the fact. At this time, I will take any questions if you have any.
Questions, comments from the committee? Ms. Cottrell?
First of all, thank you for the report, and I really appreciate that staff went back and checked on the content prior to implementation. First of all, I want to be very clear that I support the additional curriculum and the additional 40 hours of instruction in the learning domains that were added, such as human trafficking. I think it really forms a foundation for our public safety dispatchers that will set their career up for success that will hopefully last them decades. However, I have heard some concerns from the field regarding the additional week of training and how it's impacting the availability of academy space. And I just wanted to mention that here to see if you'd also heard of those concerns. And if we had looked at any sort of solutions such as leveraging technologies to offer these classes remotely or do a hybrid solution for folks that weren't able to make it in person.
I believe right now there are some that are online, and we also have some that are being presented in more of a modular or an extended format. So it's over a number of, weeks at a time. So it's extending that.
Instead of the
course
4-week
length out.
block.
Do you have one, Tammy?
I do.
Mhm.
At Delta College, we are presenting the extended format, and we do 10 hours a day on Wednesdays. And that was strategic for us because of the way that our local agencies shifts are scheduled. So Wednesdays are training days for a lot of our agencies. So our new class that's starting in January will go 16 Wednesdays of the spring, 16 of the 18 Wednesdays in the spring semester for 10 hours a day. And at the end of the spring semester, they'll get their certificate of completion.
So there are options and people can reach out to us if they want to work through what some of those options are.
And I will say, we offered that format with our first iteration, which was 120 hours or 12 Wednesdays. We got very good feedback from the agencies. And so that's why we're continuing to do it that way. People aren't gone from their centers for a month at a time or a week at a time or 2 weeks at a time. It's a day at a time and it's easier to manage.
What I said was there are options and people can reach out to us to work through those options.
Additional questions, comments? Mr. Cordova?
Yeah, thank you for that. You had mentioned something about the alternative learning styles or the modalities. I was just curious, does anybody engage in like the augmented reality or virtual reality training?
In terms of with dispatch or in general?
Both.
I don't know. Actually, I'm not aware of anyone that is.
Tammy Morel, CADA, we do at Delta. We use some virtual reality training as part of our scenario-based instruction.
Scenario-based? Okay. Thank you.
Chair, if I may, so approximately 4 years ago, we embarked on a virtual reality project and invested approximately $3.5 million in equipment, rolled it out across the state, and it just didn't work as we expected it to work. So we've kind of moved on without it, so to speak, and donated the equipment to the agencies that had it and to the colleges that had it. And we do not currently have any virtual reality or augmented reality training in the post curriculum that we have.
On that note, 3.5 years ago is a long time for
lifetime,
technology,
yeah.
right? So, and I say this just because, we're in healthcare, we're really exploring the utilization for simulations. And I think there might be an opportunity as technology has actually advanced tremendously. So it's something to think about as we start to look into that a little bit more.
I think at local, sorry, Chella Cottrell again. At local agencies, we do have an AI headset at my organization, and we use it for training. Well, we do use it for training for them to understand their geography, because getting dispatchers out into the field to do ride-alongs on night shift or day shift, it may be difficult at times to get them out of the center. So we have them put on a headset, walk through their jurisdiction virtually without leaving, right? So I think at the local agencies, it's easier to put those kind of processes into play than do it as host. But I think there are centers that are looking into it. And I know that, things like shot simulators and things like that are done at the local level.
Thank you. Any additional questions or comments? Okay, thank you, Ms. Hardesty, for that
Thank you
report.
for your time.
Okay, the next presentation will be item 4B, is a report on the development of the basic course curriculum and proposed pilot programs for LD 32 Lifetime Fitness. Staff Services Manager Anita Finner from the Basic Training Bureau will provide a report on this item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, members. In June of 2024, Basic Training Bureau staff hosted a workshop to review and revise existing Learning Domain 32 Lifetime Fitness training and testing specifications for modular basic courses across the state. Subject matter experts representing 7 basic course presenters participated. After the review of existing content, the subject matter experts proposed adding 5 hours of additional content to the Module 3 basic course and adding 16 hours of additional content to the Modular 2 basic course. The 5 added hours to the Module 3 basic course is lecture-based content and does not require the Commission Regulation 1070 instructor requirement. The 16 hours added to the Module 2 basic course will have some lecture and the proposed added required learning activity where the student will participate in a post-approved physical conditioning program. This course will require the Commission Regulation 1070 instructor requirement. If I can draw your attention to the proposed training and testing specifications, which is attachment A, I did want to point out that the blue colored boxes, or excuse me, X's, were added to existing Lifetime Fitness content for the Module 3 and 2 courses. The green colored content throughout the training and testing specs are the existing required learning activities and tests, just reorganized, causing the red strikeouts. And then beginning on the bottom of page 7 and the top of page 8 is the proposed added required learning activity for the Module 2 basic course, where the student will participate in a post-approved physical conditioning program. Post staff will be requesting Commission approval tomorrow to pilot Learning Domain 32 Lifetime Fitness for Module 3 and Module 2 basic courses beginning in December of 2024. The expectation is the pilot will continue through spring of 2026, which will allow post staff to receive student and staff feedback and report back to Commission. Thank you. Can answer any questions at this time.
Any questions or comments on this item? Ms. Merrill.
I'll make a comment on this. Tammy Morrell, Delta College, or CADA for this purposes of this, but I had the opportunity to be on the subject matter expert committee for this, and I'm a huge proponent of this. Running a modular academy, what we found is, first of all, at Delta, we've always had Lifetime Fitness from the beginning of the academy because we run our modules back to back like a regular basic course. And so our students were at a huge disadvantage in Module 1 if they didn't have some Lifetime Fitness training. So we've always done it, but we get a lot of drop-ins. So we get a lot of drop-ins from academies that are Module 3, Module 2 only. And they come to Module 1 and they're behind because our students have been doing Lifetime Fitness. The people that started with us have been doing Lifetime Fitness since the beginning of their program, about half of the academy, Modules 3 and 2. And they've never even seen the work sample test battery, which is a test that they have to pass. So adding this earlier on in a modular format academy, 1 will expose them to the work sample test battery so they know where they have to be at the end. And it will also give us academy presenters an opportunity to work on weaknesses, whether that be weight loss or specific weaknesses as it comes to fitness training. So I'm excited about it, and we're excited to participate in the pilot.
Hey, Tammy.
Additional questions, comments? Okay, thank you, Ms. Finner.
Thank you.
Our item is item 5A. It's a report on proposed changes to Commission Regulation 1003, employment status notifications regarding affidavit of separations. Staff Services Manager Caitlin Polis, Certification Bureau will provide a report on this item.
Good afternoon. This agenda item is a report on proposed changes to Commission Regulation 1003 and the Affidavit of Separation form. The proposed changes already went through the 45-day public comment period that ended on October 21st. We did not receive any public comments. It was always our intent to present the proposed changes to you as notice to the public. While creating the agenda item, an additional change was discovered that has not been noticed to the public. The proposed text as part of the attachments in your packet under subsection C1 states, posts shall be notified via the system of record within 10 days. The text that was noticed to the public stated, posts shall be notified via Mark 43 within 10 days. Having the text state system of record will avoid changes to the regulation if we move away from Mark 43 in the future. I have contacted the Office of Administrative Law to find out if an additional 15-day notice is needed if the updated text is approved by Commission tomorrow, stating system of record instead of Mark 43. At this time, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have on the proposed changes.
Any questions, comments on this item? Okay, seeing none, thank you for that report. All right, our next item is item 5B. It's a report on proposed revisions to Commission Regulations 1005, minimum standards for training. Bureau Chief Michelle Weiler from the Certification Bureau will provide a report on this item.
Good afternoon again. So this item is to address some discrepancies that we have found related to the appointments of jail deputies in EDI. Prior to the implementation of Senate Bill 2, for a number of reasons, unfortunately, we just did not pay that much attention to these appointments as much as we should have. But now, because of SB 2, we are having to pay more attention, making sure they're actually eligible, making sure the training requirements are met. And we noticed that there was some conflict in our regulation as far as what we are requiring versus what is being required in penal code. So to avoid any future confusion or issues with that, we are proposing to amend the existing text to simply state that it is a requirement to complete the Penal Code Section 832 courses, the arrest course, and if required, also the firearms course, recognizing that there are some agencies that may not require the carrying of firearms by their jail deputies. So we made that optional, and the existing text is arrest and firearms course, so that could be problematic. And then also, instead of being specific and pointing to the exact language of the Penal Code section and the requirements of the Board of State and Community Corrections, we simply pointed directly at the Penal Code section so that in the future, if the text of the Penal Code section changes, we don't also have to change the regulation. Hopefully this provides a little additional clarity. Some of the conflict right now is that the Penal Code states specifically that it's 120 days to complete this training requirement. We know that the BSCC has different requirements, and so that's not our arena. That's not our, so we're just pointing to the Penal Code section, and whatever happens there, and that's what we will enforce on our end.
Questions or comments? Sheriff Honey.
As a person who employs 830.1 per NC deputies and my colleagues at the State Sheriff's Association, this has been a source of frustration for us. So I fully agree with and appreciate Post's position with regard to these changes. I think that will go a long way towards helping us deal with the frustration and we are also experiencing challenges with getting our newly hired employees into some of these courses. And so this will help that. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Sheriff. Any additional comments, questions? Okay, thank you for that report. Our next presentation is item 5C, is a report on proposed amendments to Commission Regulation 1201, definitions related to peace officer certification. And we'll hear from Staff Services Manager Caitlin Polis from the Certification Bureau to provide a report.
So before Caitlin begins, I just wanted to advise the committee that we will be pulling this item from the commission's agenda tomorrow due to some last minute conflicts and concerns that were raised by legal counsel. But because we have agendized it, if you have any questions after Caitlin's presentation, we'll be open to taking those into consideration for the future presentation to the commission.
Hello again. So the initial changes to Commission Regulation 1201 were approved by Commission on June 13th, 2024. During the rulemaking process with the Office of Administrative Law, or OAL, it was determined more clarity, greater explanation of necessity, and additional references were needed to support the proposed definitions. The report that was presented to you in the agenda covers the changes made from the initial version, including adding reference to the post-disciplinary guidelines for definitions of accusation, conditional certification, and stipulated settlement. Also adding verbatim phrases used in regulation for canceled appointment. So adding the words cancellation of an appointment. Denied appointment was added to have denial of notice of appointment, and denied certificate was added to have denial of basic certificate, because OAL was asking that our definitions, if not stated as how we were defining it, we needed to have the words verbatim added to our definition for clarity. And then some rewording for clarity and consistency was added to accusation. We added the word pleading within the definition, so it read legal pleading document. Canceled appointment, we removed background in the definition, so it reads minimum requirements instead of minimum background requirements. And that was just for consistency's sake. Cancel certificate, instead of just restating what can be found in 1202, we just referenced to it instead. And then default revocation, we added a reference to 1203. That's another spot that it can be found. The updated text before you in this agenda report, if approved, will be moving forward as at a later date, but it'll be moving forward with the disciplinary guidelines, so it'll be a combined packet. Instead, the OAL felt that it would provide more clarity for the public if we're presenting it together. Also, most of the changes that were being made are referenced in the guidelines. And that's all I have to.
And just for clarification, one of the reasons we are pulling this is because the disciplinary guidelines are not yet ready for the commission to review and approve. So that reference here is a little problematic. So we're pulling, that's one of the reasons we're pulling it. So, and another reason that they'll be presented together again in March. So it'll make more sense to see them side by side.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or comments on that item then? If not, we will move on to the next item, which is a report and proposed amendment to Commission Regulation 1202 Peace Officer Certifications. And again, we'll hear from Staff Services Manager Caitlin Polis.
Sorry, I'm going to go ahead and take this one. This one is pretty cut and dry. There are a number of pieces in our current regulation 1202 related to peace officer certificates that needed additional clarity and some revisions to align with our current processes. Initially, when we established this regulation, we pulled directly from 1011, which was the prior regulation that encompassed all certificates. And as we're moving forward and cleaning up our processes, streamlining our processes, adjusting to some of the stuff that we're finding with SB2 that weren't working before. We're having to do some cleanup language and also clarify there's still some confusion about training requirements, education requirements, what qualifies as training versus education. So a lot of this is just cleanup language for that. And then one other thing I wanted to point to is the authority and reference section. The commission may see more of this in the future. It was advised by the Office of Administrative Law that we remove specific subsections in case the penal code section as a whole changes and the subsections are adjusted, then we don't have to worry about adjusting them here. It's just a general penal code section reference. So those are the overview of the changes that we're making.
Okay, thank you for that report. Any questions or comments on this item? Okay, we will move on to item E, a report on proposed changes to Commission Regulation 1203, Peace Officer Disqualification. And again, from Staff Services Manager Caitlin Pullis from the Certification Bureau.
I'm also going to take this one. So back in September at our commission meeting on a different subject relating to the executive director's authority to accept default revocations. It was also discussed that when there is a felony conviction and somebody is disqualified for that or eligible misdemeanor convictions, those individuals that are convicted after January 1st, 2022 are subject to revocation as opposed to just deeming them ineligible. So there was a discussion about us also being delegated that authority to revoke as a matter of the statutory authority rather than having to go back to the commission and having them vote on this. And because we had established that in regulation, we have to go back and amend the regulation to incorporate that change in their desired change in the process. We did have a couple of last minute revisions to this as well, just to make sure that subsection 3 and subsection 4 are aligned. Copies of these have been made and will be available to the commission. I'm not sure if you guys had copies. There are copies in the back, but I'm going to go ahead and read into the record what these changes are so you guys have them in case you don't have it in front of you. So we're proposing that the new text of subsection 3 read, if a written response is not received or postmarked within 30 calendar days of the latest date of mailing of the notice of intent or within any extension of time granted for the response, a default revocation shall be issued. The peace officer certification shall be revoked by the commission without further proceedings pursuant to Penal Code Section 13510.8A1. The person shall be served by regular and certified mail, written notice of the final the person shall be served by regular and certified mail, written notice of the final order of revocation. Got a little thrown off by the strikeout there. And then subsection 4 will be amended to read, if a written response is received, the division will review the response and conduct any appropriate additional investigation deemed necessary to determine whether a disqualifying conviction occurred. If, following review and any additional investigation, the division determines that a disqualifying conviction occurred, it shall revoke the certification without further proceedings pursuant to Penal Code Section 13510.8A1. The commission shall serve the final order of revocation upon the person and/or their legal representative by regular and certified mail. The extent of our proposed revision there.
Questions or comments on this item? Okay, seeing none, thank you for that report. And we'll move on to this next section. Next presentation is an item 6A. This is a report on changes to Commission Regulation 1054, requirements for course budget. And Bureau Chief Brad Newmeyer from the Training Program Service Bureau will provide a report on this item.
Good afternoon, all. Brad Newmeyer, Training Program Services Bureau Chief. Commission Regulation 1054 contains the maximum allowance for costs that are line items in the certified course budget. Working group was put together at the direction of the Executive Director to update this regulation that has not been updated since 1999. About 25 years, a bit long. The current regulations provide the following maximum limits for instruction at $90 per hour, general coordination at $440, presentation coordination at $25 per hour, clerical support at $15 per hour. One note, the presentation coordination is a position that's typically an on-site coordinator that handles the coordination of the courses, makes sure the instructors show up. They're there to provide instruction if an instructor no shows. It's a wide ranging, and in our actual regulation, it allows for an additional duty of supervision of clerical staff, which elevates that to a possible manager or supervisory position, which $25 an hour probably isn't going to get us there. And all these costs by state regulation are both salary and benefits. So some of these hourlies might be higher, and some of our research only had hourly, some of it had hourly and benefits. So we had to massage the numbers through to try to come up with an equitable number that everybody can understand how we got there. We had a working group of 3 staff services managers from 2 different bureaus. We had 2 associate government program analysts and myself to work on this for about 18 months to work through the math. And I'll just tell you how we came up with all of these things. So we looked at 4 different indicators of data after reviewing those 4 salary limits that just were not sufficient to cover the actual presentation costs going on today. And we came up with 4 indicators to use. One was a presenter survey and the results of what they're actually paying now. I was frankly disappointed with the response we got, which was very limited and had a lot of just misinput numbers that kind of threw the numbers all off. So we largely threw out probably 75% of the responses because they just weren't responsive to the question we asked. But the 3 other key indicators we used were an inflation data calculator from the Bureau of Labor Statistics that shows a 92% increase in the cost of $1 from 99 to now, which almost doubled it. Like positions in the California Employment Development Department of Labor Statistics, which is private sector positions, California state HR like classifications in the state footing. And those are the 4 indicators we typically used, and they all had typical ranges that were pretty close. So with the recommended rate increases, we came up with, for the instructor rate, it lists the floor and the ceiling right now. The floor is $35 and a maximum of $90 from the 99 regulation. We recommend keeping the floor at 35 because even with the with the presenter surveys, the average instructor cost is still showing at about $65 because there are markets all over the state that demand less or higher compensation rates. South Bay, San Diego would clearly be higher than the northern reaches of the state. So we have to make it work for the entire state. So we recommend the floor to remain at 35, which could be accountable for some, but the top go to a maximum of $155 per hour. General compensation is currently set at not to exceed 440 hours, which has a little weird word problem in the regulation. It's $55 for 8 hours, not to exceed 440, which I did the division on the 440. It's 8 times 8 is 64 hours. So you can get that for 64 hours. So we didn't want to mess with the word problems. We just basically indexed that straight to inflation and changed it to $105 per 8 and up to 440 per presentation for presentation costs. Presentation coordination compensation is set at $15 to $25. It's woefully short. We recommend raising it the floor to 35 and the maximum to 85. And one thing that we kept in here that we didn't add into it was we looked at our current contract rates for the same thing, and they range anywhere from $55 to $75 or $80 per. So there's a little bit of room for growth on that middle piece. And then for clerical support, we set it the floor at $16, which is the current minimum wage, up to $45 per hour. Because if you're paying clerical staff $25 or $30 an hour, there might be some benefit load that could run 30 to 50% on it. So we want to cover it all. And this is just a starting point since we haven't done it in 25 years. If it's woefully off or there's problems to fix, hopefully by the indicators we chose now, we could redo it in 3 years pretty simply by using the same indicators if it gets through the Department of Finance and OAL, that we can just revisit that and do it more quickly for the next time. So those are the recommendation minimum numbers that we came up with. Now we had to figure out through finance impact report, what the hit will be to both post-budget and the state budget at large. Very smart SSM1 in our building built a spreadsheet that pulled in all the data from our course budgets. And then we start adding percentages to these numbers to figure out what the impact would be. And by incorporating all the data from the course budgets, what we propose the numbers to be, it showed both the impact to post-budget for typically tuition reimbursable courses versus non-tuition reimbursable courses that the agencies have to pay more of. And we estimated with the work that we put in place that the anticipated increase to post-budget would be $2.78 million per year. This is a proposed or possible impact. An anticipated impact of up to $20.9 million per year to post-participating agencies and citizens for tuition costs and non-reimbursed post-training. So 2.78 and 20.9. And the anticipated $2.78 million increase to the post-budget will not require a request for additional funding, as the annual budget for post will be able to account for the reimbursement increases and overall yearly impact. So that's our work in our presentation to get post commission on the minimum and maximum reimbursement amounts and to advise posts what the hit to post budget and the impact to the field would be if this is approved.
Yeah, I believe Director Alvarez wanted to make some comments. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate it. Manny Alvarez from Post. So this really hits on two areas for us. One is to obviously address the 1999 numbers to make them more accurate. Obviously, $15 for clerical support doesn't even meet the what am I looking at? Minimum hourly rate now in California. So that's one. Two is for those of you that kind of work in the post arena with post courses, there's a post budget that has to be done, and using those numbers doesn't pencil out is the best way to put it. So agencies, departments, private presenters, I don't want to say they vague the numbers up, but they have to make it work in order to have the tuition or the, whatever they're going to charge for these courses. So they're all out of whack. You see, hey, we've got to buy 25 notepads at $5 a piece to bump up the numbers so that it comes out right. They also, obviously interject indirect costs of 25% just to beef up the number so that the tuition kind of pencils out for them. So hopefully it'll give us some more accurate budget numbers. In terms of the cost to post, the 2.78 million, we feel like we can absorb that with local assistance monies and training monies that we think we already have, that the state has given us to push out. And we just haven't been able to push it out based on these numbers as easily as we would like. In terms of the cost to other agencies across the state, that $20 million, it could be an increased tuition costs. If that's the case, which could be a negative, as we all know. But hopefully, with the way the budget is worked out, that the budget numbers are a little bit more accurate, won't necessarily increase those tuition costs, as well as hopefully there's, somebody raises their rates from $800 to $3,000. People aren't going to go to that course. They're going to go to the good courses, the ones that are reasonable and at a reasonable cost. So we factored that in as well. So we will see. We all obviously have some concerns at the Department of Finance with the state budget the way it is. It might reject it. So we know it still has to go through them for approval, let alone through the Office of Administrative Law for the regulatory change. But this has been a long time coming for us from my early days at Post. That was the first thing I heard from one of the college presenters. It's like, this budget doesn't work. Your numbers are all off. We buy notepads and pens and papers just to make it all balance out. So hopefully this is going to right the ship a little bit and then get some of the money out that we have that we've been returning that's intended to go out to the rest of the state for training.
Thank you. Mr. Cordova.
Yes, Anthony Cordova, Community Colleges. Just a thought process. You had mentioned the current state minimum wage. Why are we putting a fixed number? How come we just don't put it in there as a current California minimum wage standard instead of having to go back and revisit that anytime you have a change in minimum wage.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, if I may, you want to take that, Brad, or you want me to take it? Okay.
Go for it, sir.
So we've tried with other regulations, specifically with travel reimbursement for lodging. We tried our best to just point it back to the state of California Department of General Services and CalHR publish lodging rates and per diem. And it was rejected about 5 years ago by the Office of Administrative Law and wanted some specificity with numbers. So we just decided in this instance, we kind of assumed that if we, included the CPI numbers for future numbers, that it wouldn't fly.
That makes sense.
Yeah,
Okay,
so we'll
thank you.
probably have to revisit it again in the future, but at least this way we'll have somewhat of a modern framework for updating it 3-4 years from now if need be.
And just one clarity, you can only ask for reimbursement of your actual expenses. So if you're actually under the 35, you can't ask for more than what you're actually paying for. So we won't not pay you if it's under 35. We'll still reimburse what you asked for, but we just set it as a range because we're just being systematic and that was there before. And then it limits the OL changes. We just keep the same footprint and change the dollar amounts going forward to just make it more simplistic because it's been so long to take away the complexity of the request and make it just the dollar changes and move on if we can get those through and approved.
Thank you.
Additional questions or comments? All right, seeing none. Thank you, Mr. Newmeyer.
Thank you.
Okay, our next presentation is item 7A is report on peace officer revocations based on felony convictions. Bureau Chief Michelle Weiler from the Certification Bureau will provide a report on this item.
Glad Brad could keep the seat warm for me. Yes, so this is going to quite likely, hopefully, be the last presentation of the peace officers who will be revoked based on felony convictions. I think there's supposed to be slides for this. So typically, this is something we present to the commission for our new members, and they would review these names and the convictions and then take a vote to approve these revocations. So there are 10 names on this list since it appears we don't have it available for you. I don't know if any of you have had a chance to review this as part of the agenda. Oh, there it is. Those are the ineligibles. Do we have another one? Yeah, so it should be part of the agenda online. But if you look at it for our new members, the individuals are listed by last name, first name. We identify their last employing agency, which we always stipulate is not necessarily their current employing agency. It's just where they were last employed at the time of their separation or conviction. It may have even been prior to their conviction. The district, so that's our Professional Conduct Bureau district. And then, I'm sorry, the court district. And then the date of conviction or judgment and what the actual conviction was for. So the charges are laid out so that it's a level of transparency. It keeps you and our commissioners more abreast of what these officers have been convicted for.
Okay, Director Evers.
Yeah, if I may, just from my own perspective, so that we're all on the same page and the members understand. So a conviction after January 1, 2022 is a revocation. It's not an ineligible, and the commission has to approve those. So what's been happening is we show all of those individuals that we've notified that they have a felony conviction. The commission then on a quarterly basis, sometimes, 3 or 4 months later, sees them up on the board and they go, yep, go ahead and notify them. And after the commission, we get a stack of letters that we have to send out saying, hey, you've been revoked. This will make it the prior agenda item upon their conviction administratively, we will just send out those revocation notices if they have not appealed, and we will simply advise the commission in the consent item, hey, we've sent out letters, these people have all been revoked. Is that correct?
Yes.
So this hopefully will be, like you said, the last time that we will show the
Mhm.
commission for approval of those revocations. Just so I
Yes, so
understand
this
correctly.
will become more of an informative item. So the list that was shown previously, those are for, what we call our 1029 ineligibles. Those are individuals who were convicted of 1029 identified crimes, whether felony or misdemeanor, prior to January 1st, 2022. So this will now accompany that list as just an informative piece for the commission, as we will be revoking these as we process them.
And if I may, one more time, Mr. Chair, we keep referring to 1029. It's Government Code Section
Yes,
1029.
sorry.
So we always just refer to it as 1029, but their disqualifiers is enumerated in the Government Code.
Sorry. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Sharapone.
Just a quick question. I noticed that most of them have a last employed date. There are two of them, one from San Bernardino, other from Antioch, that don't have that. Does that mean they're still employed as peace officers?
So at the time of preparation for this and conviction, they were still showing in EDI as employed. So we want to reflect our record at the time of publication. That's not to say that they are no longer, or that they are still employed now, but at the time that we prepared this, yes.
Is it your belief that all of these people are no longer currently employed as peace officers? Okay, thank you.
Just for clarification, they cannot be employed as peace officers, right? Because they're either revoked or ineligible. However, that doesn't mean that some of them, and this occurs on a rare occasion, are transferred to admin jobs. So they may show up, as an employee of a law enforcement agency, but they shouldn't be an EDI as a peace officer. There's 13 names. We did finally find the document, so poor Michelle was flying blind here, but there they are.
I'm like, well, let me count really quick. Yes, and this also is partially addressed by what I mentioned earlier with the affidavit of separations. It should help us reconcile the information that we have between EDI and Mark 43. So as these come in, we can verify, hey, we have this information in Mark 43, but it's not showing the same way in EDI when you do the separation. We're also starting to follow up if the agency identifies in Mark 43 that the person has been terminated or resigned or whatnot, and we don't see that in EDI within a certain period of time. My team reviews that, and we are asking the bureau chiefs of our different professional conduct bureaus to reach out to these agencies to confirm, because we're finding in many agencies, the people reporting to us in Mark 43 are not the same people who are entering the data into EDI, and so they don't always know what's happening. And so that's part of the whole piece that we're trying to reconcile with the change to the affidavit of separation and the notice of separation.
I believe Toby wanted to make a comment.
Since we have some new advisory members, I just wanted to let you know, with respect to these conviction matters, we very carefully review the facts of each of the cases. So when the information comes to us, my legal department and POSAD, we gather all of the appropriate records and documentation from the court. We study the chain of events of what happened in the criminal conviction, because it can get very complicated in state law in terms of whether or not any given set of facts amounts to an actual conviction that would result in decertification. So we go through a very careful legal analysis in each case to make sure that these individuals, before we either notice them that they are ineligible under 13.510.7 of the Penal Code, or that we are revoking them under Senate Bill 2, that analysis is a very thorough one. So I just wanted to let you know that, since we do have some new advisory members.
Thank you. Any additional questions or comments on this item? Okay, seeing none, thank you for that presentation. Okay, that concludes the requested presentations. Before we move on, I'll ask if there are any other questions or comments related to the commission's agenda before we move on. Okay, we will now move on to advisory committee member reports. This is the time for members of the advisory committee to to report on any items from their respective organizations. And how about I start next to me here with Lieutenant Stalker.
I have none, thank you.
Mr. Pacheco, any reports from your CPOA?
Yes, from CPOA, again, thanks for the opportunity to be here at the table. We are currently changing a lot of our course outlines, trying to obviously partner with Post. We do have a course that we just wrapped up on K-9 program implementation. So we're interested in looking at any possible new regulations coming, and any partnership we can do with Post would be more than happy to do so.
Ms. Cordova.
Yes, thank you. No official report other than the fact that I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to engage in the advisory committee itself. On behalf of the California Community Colleges, one of the things that we're really looking to be more mindful of is that strategic alignment and the partnerships of being more collaborative and effective in the work that we're doing. And let me know if there's ever anything that I could do to help support that collaboration with Post and the California Community Colleges. That's it.
Thank you. Ms. Morrell?
Thank you. CADA members are working on retooling because we have a lot of pilot programs coming up. They're exciting. We're looking forward to them. It takes a little bit of work on our end, and we're hoping for a little bit of grace in EDI because the deadlines that typically would be required in EDI, we're not going to be able to meet just because of the late approval. For example, LD 32 pilot, I have a class starting in January. I'm not going to make the 45-day deadline. So we're assuming that the pilot's going to be approved. So we're just needing a little bit of grace with our approvers so that we can get these courses presented.
I mean, Mr. Chair, so just to clarify, it's that 30-day window. Is that what the course
Yeah,
needs to be in EDI?
45-day window now. So,
Okay, all right, I see.
Yep.
Carrie Holler and basic training, they're all nodding their heads, so we will do our best.
Excellent, thank you.
As you know, our goal is, how do we get to yes? These guys have heard it. That is our motto.
Right.
How do we get to yes? So we'll give it our best. So thank you.
Thank
And
you.
we appreciate that you pilot new stuff. We really, really do. That's what makes us better. If if we just keep relying on stuff that was 20 years ago, it's not a good thing either internally for us. And sometimes you guys develop stuff that we can, incorporate later. So we appreciate it. So we're all for it. Thank you.
And I will say that, I've had the opportunity to sit on several subject matter expert committees now in my role as CADA, which I very much appreciate. And your bureau chiefs are great. And what I found is that when we actually sit down in a room, even though there's angst about something that might be changing, when the subject matter experts get in a room, we really all agree. And so I think it says a lot about your staff. They're bringing forward things that really need attention. So thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Cottrell?
Yeah, good afternoon. During this last intersession, a few trends emerged from the dispatch industry that I think are worth noting. The NextGen 911 project, which will replace existing legacy infrastructure for 911 services in North America with cloud-based solutions, is ramping up in scale and implementation. And with any great change in practice, there's some growing pains, and some media events recently have highlighted concerns. Separate from this issue, but somewhat related, is a rapid escalation in generative AI coming into policing. And to quote a colleague, the changes we're navigating through in emergency communications is similar to when we evolved from manual handwritten card into our current CAD software, computer-aided dispatching. And these updates in technology will affect not only the approximately 440 public safety answering points, commonly called dispatch centers in California, but also California policing practices, with updates and improvements in the amount and type of data that dispatch centers are able to collect and disseminate to field responders. As Post oversees the training and standards for dispatchers and dispatch supervisors, I can see the need for engagement regarding the state of the industry, the primary concerns, which include attempting to onboard these significant technological changes, the chronic shortages in staffing, and the struggle to retain those who are able to advance through the training programs. While studies exist on a national level from both private entities and related 911 associations, I'm curious to see what metrics we can discern at the state level, which may steer decision-making in both hiring and training practices, which could alleviate some of the burden on individual agencies trying to troubleshoot these issues as a singular entity. instead of examining the shared issue at a macro level and coming up with best practices or solutions. Thank you.
Thank you for that report. Yes,
So,
Director
Mr.
Elder.
Chair, since Member Cottrell has brought this up in the past, so since the last meeting that you all participated in June, there was some discussion about the professional staff training, aside from what you just spoke about. So we issued a survey. I'm sure you saw that, and I just wanted to let you know, since I know some of the members or some of our staff are in the audience, we are moving forward with that by adding personnel and really just putting an emphasis on professional staff training. So hopefully in the near future, you'll be seeing more. I know you've been a very big advocate of that. So we'll keep pushing. We haven't let it die on the vine. So thank you.
Thank you. Sheriff Hone.
Yes, thank you. Since this is my first meeting, I don't have a specific report from the California State Sheriff's Association. That said, I do intend to go back to CSSA and speak to our legislative advocates about the ongoing challenges of AB 89 and see that CSSA lends its support to post in the ongoing effort to clarify and correct the language on there. So I'll make sure to bring that up. And then I have another hat that I wear, and that is as a member of the CLETS Advisory Committee. The committee referenced in the bulletin that has created conflict. I have requested that this matter be agendized at our next committee meeting and would request that post be invited to come and outline your position for the committee members so that we're there. So I see the importance of resolving this conflict and will do what I can as a member of that committee to do so.
Ms. Rosa.
Thank you. So probably not unique to San Bernardino County. We are dealing with a lot of issues with not only hiring law enforcement officers, but dispatchers as well. To the point, it's beyond the critical point. So I know that we are very cognizant of the legislation about the modern policing degree and the discrepancy in the language. And that is something that we're obviously paying attention to and advocating for some clarification on that language. So hopefully, I mean, I know everyone probably at this table can understand and appreciate the hard work that's going into this, but you know, I see this as very critical, especially in our department where we are we have a mix of folks that are retiring at 50 and then a lot of folks that have to work until they're 57. And the strain that's going to put on the workers' comp system in California. So these are all things that are top of mind in San Bernardino County, and I'm sure definitely not unique to our county. But that's all I have.
So Kenny Ehrman Porak, I'll echo the sentiments of my last two committee members. The educational requirements, though not quite completely flushed out, it's concerning to a lot of us. We talked at the break, we see this trend moving forward to a big push into revisiting the idea of going to trade school or learning a trade or doing things out of high school instead of going on to college to avoid racking up $100,000 in debt. Is kind of pushing away from the traditional education track. Now we have a new education track that may or may not require additional college. And we're really concerned that the real purpose for this is to push people away from wanting to get into law enforcement. We have people that come from the outside world that weren't focused on law enforcement going into college. They come from other fields. They'll have none of these courses completed when they go to the academies. And we'll have to do additional schooling possibly. These classes, I'm guessing, aren't going to be free. So there'll be additional drains on resources, which are always at the lowest when you first start. And it's just a myriad of concerns. And I will say, like I stated, I'm not the most up-to-date person on there, and I appreciate the robust discussion we had today, but it's very concerning. And I think I'm more concerned now than when I got to the meeting today. So I appreciate the discussion. I just hope that there's a more favorable outcome for this. My agencies used to require not only a bachelor's, we require a bachelor's degree to come into our career field, the investigation field at the state, but it used to be narrowed down to about 3 different topics. And we used to say that really makes a lot of sense, how somebody could have a sociology degree, but if they have a degree in mathematics or physics, they're not qualified to do this job. So we fought for a long time to expand and to make it more open. And now I feel like here's a whole nother additional attack on what type of education you have to be a police officer. And it's just very concerning. So we have agencies as across the board at the state, we average about 20 to 25 to 30% vacancy at every single agency. And we're just concerned what this will do to that. So I appreciate everybody's input today, and I look forward to discussing this more in the future, but it's a concern. I don't think any of us on this side are not concerned about this. And I don't think I realized how much I did know about it till today. So maybe I'll quit trying to pretend like I'm so up to date on this topic, but I do really appreciate it. I thank all of you for bringing this to light today.
Well, thank you. And I'll conclude with a report from California Police Chiefs Association. A number of legislative issues to be addressed in this upcoming session, but I'll really just focus in on the one, AB 89, as each of you have spoken about. I know all of the law enforcement associations are in communications to address the variety of concerns and issues. And I know we've also been in conversation with Post about what that looks like moving forward. So I'm hopeful that in this next legislative session, we'll get some solutions to AB 89 and some clearer picture of what that looks like moving forward. And but I believe that will happen. So I know there's a lot of work taking place there, and hopefully we have good news a year from now and the clearer picture on what that looks like. Okay, that concludes the comments from or committee member reports. I'll move on to commissioner comments. I already threw something at me. Commissioner comments. I know that Commissioner Long, Chair Long is present. Any other commissioners that may have any comments to address the group?
Just me, no real comments. I'm Jeff Long, Chair. Just that we very much appreciate the work.
Thank you, Chair Long. Okay, under old business, we have no old business for discussion, so we will move on to new business. So our new business item is we have selection of the advisory committee chair and vice chair. Commission Policy Manual Section A7K requires the advisory committee to select a chair and a vice chair from among its members at the last scheduled meeting of each calendar year. As today is the last scheduled meeting of the advisory committee for 2024. We will now accept nominations in the form of a motion. So we'll start with the position of the advisory committee chair. For the advisory committee chair for the year of 2025, are there any nominations from the floor from the committee members for the position of advisory committee chair?
I move to reappoint Chief Salazar.
Second.
I have a motion for Salazar in a second. Any additional nominations before we move to a vote? For chair, no additional nominations? Have a motion and a second. Ms. Essex, will you please take a roll call for a nomination for Salazar, 2025 Advisory Committee Chair?
Advisory member Cordova,
Yes.
advisory member Cottrell,
Yes.
advisory member Erman,
Yes.
advisory member Gamboa, advisory member Honey,
Yes.
advisory member Oborn, advisory member Rosa,
Yes.
advisory member Salazar,
Yes. Yes.
advisory member Stalker, advisory member Morrell,
Yes.
advisory member Pacheco.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Now for the 2025 Vice Chair of the Advisory Committee, I will open the floor for nominations for Vice Chair for the Advisory Committee for this next year. Are there any motions or nominations for that position?
Being that we just nominated and elected Brent Stalker at the last meeting, I would make a motion that Brent continue as vice chair.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Cottrell second.
Cottrell second. Tell you what, we have one nomination. Any additional nominations? All in favor for this vote, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes for Stalker for vice chair. Okay, tomorrow, the new advisory committee member nomination, the commission will be voting on a new advisory member, Chief Cindy Pontes from the California Highway Patrol. They will take that under submission tomorrow. Future meetings for the advisory committee will be held March 4th of 2025 in the greater San Diego area, and on June 3rd, 2024 at post headquarters here in West Sacramento. And with that, our meeting is adjourned. Thank you.